Okay, so everyone, welcome along to our deliberations for Waikirikiri tour. Karakia, Whakataka taho ki te uru, Whakataka taho ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. Ihi aki ana te atakura, I tio, I te rika, I hohu, tihei, mauri ora. And councillor information. Let us affirm today that we as councillors will work together to serve the citizens of Selwyn District. They always use our gifts of understanding, courage, common sense, wisdom and integrity in all our discussions, dealings and decisions so that we may solve problems effectively. May we always recognise each other's values and opinions, be fair-minded and ready to listen to each other's point of view. In our dealings with each other, let us always be open to the truth of others and ready to seek agreement, slow to take offence and always prepared to forgive. May we always work to enhance the well-being of Selwyn District and its communities. We will. We've got a few apologies today. Elizabeth is on her way and will be here soon. Malcolm, Shane, Grant, Deborah and Lydia will not be joining us, so we do have a call, and there's enough people here to make a decision and recommendation to council when it comes to the council agenda. Half plus one, and with 11 of us, we are 12, we're at 6. And we will be at 7, yeah. So we're at
just got away.
No, we're at 6 now.
No, we're at 5. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh,
This is an appointed group by council to do this work, so you have full participation here. And out of the councillors and myself, that makes 11. Plus Megan is 12, and there's 6 of us here, which is half.
Yay, that's
no, it's not the plus one. You just need 50%.
It was an odd number, then we have to be above. Sorry, can I have a move and second of those apologies? Thanks, Phil. Bob, all those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. And I'll hand over to the team to run us through the work that we're going to do today. I want to thank you for the work done between the hearings and deliberations to come up with the changes to the document and circulate them to that to us ahead of time. Today we will work through kind of change by change, have any discussion on the changes and any amendments to the staff recommendations, and then any further things that needed to be raised. We had asked that all councillors please share that with staff ahead of time, so I'm not expecting there to be any late changes today. However, this is the last chance to make change because the recommendations from here will go straight to a council meeting for endorsement. So if you do have something that you hadn't raised, look, I know none of you do, but if you had, today is the last chance for that. So I hand over to the team. Yeah, right, thank you.
Kia ora everyone, thank you. Before we kind of get underway, we'll just do a bit of a kind of summary of where we've come from, where we're going, just to kind of make sure we're, we've gone through it several times with you all already, but just a bit of a refresher. So the work began on the draft of Waikirikiri to our future Selwyn back in 2020. After a review of current district plan development strategy, Selwyn 2031 was determined to no longer fit for purpose. It was decided that it shouldn't just be an update, but also an elevation of the strategy to impact all of council's plans, policies, strategies to ensure they're aligned for all council functions and decisions going forward. Since then, council staff, our team have been working on developing a robust foundation evidence base through technical research, spatial analysis and the review of the previous consultations, which has led to the draft of Waikirikiri Ki Toa Future Selwyn that you're looking at today. The draft has 4 main sections. The first part includes 4 sections that provide the contextual and evidential base for developing the draft of Waikirikiri Ki Toa Future Selwyn. This includes a body of technical work, spatial analysis, and the synthesis of information. Part 2 includes the one titled section, Are Many Futures? This section is there to acknowledge the uncertainty that the future holds by exploring potential scenarios that the district could experience. Serves essentially as a stress test for the strategy to ensure that it can adapt to all the emerging challenges and opportunities that are going to come our way. Part 3 includes the bulk of the strategy and the spatial direction. This is the main part that we're looking at today and that we consulted on. This part includes the 4 sections, the strategic framework, the strategic priorities, the urban form direction, and the district picture. The strategy is the core of Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn, sets out the vision for Selwyn, the outcome we want to achieve, and the directions on how to achieve them. So in part 4, I should note, is currently a placeholder for monitoring. It'll be an interactive dashboard that measures the progress of the outcomes of the strategic framework going forward, but we're waiting until we've confirmed the rest of Future Selwyn before we progress further on that. So for the consultation that we did, the draft was sent out, was endorsed on the 12th of June this year by the council. Engagement and consultation took place through July, from the 1st to the 4th of August. The purpose was to both raise awareness and familiarity with Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn, and to receive feedback from the community to ensure that it represents the views of the district. To do this, we took a number of measures. We did drop-in sessions and events that many of the councillors, many of you helped out with, and appreciate that, where we talked directly with the community in their townships. We had many online resources, particularly the Your Say submission form, and the which directed to Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn. We had the physical materials, primarily the consultation document that we often gave out at the drop-in sessions and also at libraries. And then there was the online and traditional advertising that we did. So we received, so the Your Say, the online form, received over 26,000 views. So that's 72% higher than what the LTP did earlier in the year, with about a 2.3% engagement rate, and 104 completed submissions through Your Say by the end. The Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn itself saw a total of 15,000 views throughout the campaign, and overall 112 submissions were received, both physically and online. Probably the best comparison is to compare it to the GCSP, the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, which received 358 submissions. The Greater Christchurch area has roughly 537,000 residents. Based on the estimated population of Selwyn, we have around 84,000 potentially at the moment. So that gives the Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn response rate is about double that of the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan on a per capita basis. After we received all those submissions, I prepared an officer's report to inform the hearing and deliberations. This report was considered the submissions received and provided responses and recommended changes to the draft in relation to issues raised by the submitters. We had the public hearing 2 weeks ago, on the 31st of August, for any of the submitters who wished to be heard. While we had 31 initially indicating they wanted to be heard, 19 were heard on the day. Some dropped out because they weren't able to make the day, others because they were happy with my officer's recommendation. And post that, I prepared a summary report, which you should have in front of you, and was sent through Diligent to further respond to any of the hearing submissions received, which brings us to today. So for today, this is your opportunity, as Sam said, to consider the submissions and officers' report, and to come to an agreement on the changes that should be made to the draft. Once the changes are confirmed, we will go away and incorporate them back into the strategy, ready for the final version, which will come to you, intending to be next month at the council meeting. So in terms of the structure today, we'll be going through the section 5 of the officer's report that I wrote, which has been updated with the hearing summary report as appropriate. So at the bottom of each section, we'll go through each section, as highlighted, and just below the recommendations that I included in the officer's report, there'll be a panel where we can kind of record the views and the recommended changes that you guys make. I'll be leaving the discussion to you, but both myself and George, the strategy team leader here, will be available for any points of clarification should you need them. And after this, we'll so once future Selwyn has been ideally adopted, so I'd just like to outline the next steps after that, should you choose to adopt Waikirikiri Ki Tua future Selwyn. So the next steps will be to develop the area plans, which will be providing more detailed information and direction on future growth and development for the district. The projects contained within the area plan will then be implemented through all of the subsequent long-term plans. Also, non-spatial actions will be identified as well, including changes to district plan and or non-statutory local government act plans and policies. And these will be developed with the engagement of both yourselves and the community. So these will be the more tangible on the ground implementations of future Selwyn. But those are for a future date. Today, the purpose is just to consider what is in the Waikirikiri Ki Tua future Selwyn.
So, does anyone have any questions about the process and the what we're doing today, or any other questions before we get into the detail of it, Nicole?
Are we confirming the minutes?
Yeah, we will.
Okay, because this is a hearing summary report, isn't it? So that's after confirmation of minutes.
Okay, we can confirm the minutes before we get into the next piece.
That's all right. I'm just checking because there's just a couple of things I want change. I haven't put it through because it's just basically things that I've said. Yeah. That's what I was just checking.
Right, before we carry on then, we'll just confirm the minutes from the other piece. Nicole, you'll move them. What's some changes?
Yes.
Do you want to highlight the changes that you have identified?
Yep. On page 7 of Diligent in the Mary O'Brien one that was disability action. One. 7th bullet point, and it's talking about Councillor Reid noted the whole journey to be looked at, not just moving around the community, it's actually moving around community centres that I said is quite a distinct difference.
It says Councillor Reid noted it was important for the whole journey to be looked at, not just moving around the community. I actually said not just moving around community centres. There's quite a big difference in that change. That's why I wanted it recorded. And it is something that I've mentioned a number of times here. And on page 10, it's got the meeting was adjourned at 2:01 p.m. Meeting reconvened at 2:50 p.m. Councillors Dee Hassan and Jean Miller left the meeting at 2:01 p.m. I assume that's wrong because our meeting adjourned then, and this has come later as being an entry. And that's so someone might want to have, if they want that correct, might want to look at the live stream. This is on, sorry, yes, it's page 10 of.
I think they left at the adjournment and they didn't come back for the final part of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's good. Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. Meeting's happy with those changes. Second if that. Thank you, Sophie. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carries. Cool. Thank you. Ryan, we'll hand back to you and we'll work through as you've put them before us. Thank you.
Yeah, so as I said, we're working through the section 5. I've kept the numbering the same, just so that if you do refer back to the original officer's report, it doesn't get too confusing. We'll just take it step by step through the themes that were identified and opened up. So the first one was the submission and themes, in the general themes. The strategy structure. There was a number of submissions, including from ultimately Sustainable Agriculture, who spoke at the hearing, and there were some recommendations which I'll scroll down. So see if I can. Sorry, we'll see if I can. So these are recommendations, and we can record. We can kind of go through step by step how, both whether you're happy to adopt each one as it is, or whether you want to make additional changes, or anything else that you receive from submissions that in this topic that you'd like to include.
Great. So councillors, we'll do this for the first couple of suggested changes, and then we'll just get a sense of how the meeting feels the flow is and working through at this pace. And then we can make changes after we've done the first couple. So Ryan, maybe take us through in some level of detail what was said and why you've made the changes, and then we can make some decision on it.
So the first one we've got there, amend all instances of outcomes and directions to outcomes, putting outcomes and directions. And that is very much linked with the second one, which is the putting a description above the outcomes and directions and that's basically to provide greater clarity on how the outcomes are sort of layered and kind of improve the navigability of the strategy. If I go to the strategy. So some of the submissions we received indicated that it was a bit unclear that with the higher level outcomes, then the secondary outcomes, and then within those the directions, it wasn't kind of clear how that worked. So we wanted to provide further clarity of how that sort of, I guess, nested process worked. So happy to discuss that, whether people are happy with that.
Councillors, you're generally happy with that change in line with the request and to make the document more consistent. Any comments on that? Mover and seconder for the change. Thanks, Phil. Second, Elizabeth. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you. So that means the panel recommendation is confirming our officer's recommendation.
Yep. So I'll just confirm, yeah, we do have minutes as well recording this, so we can kind of go back and sort of update some of this. But the box at the bottom will be probably more for working through if you want to sort of wordsmith some of the bits or the sections.
We don't want to get into wordsmithing today.
Too much.
No.
Yeah. I'm happy with that. Yep. So the next section was implementation. Include a section around that. It's a number of submissions, and at the hearing we heard people concerned that it was at kind of that Waikirikiri tour was kept at a high level, and it wasn't clear how this would tangibly make differences on the ground. While it's intention that it is meant to be a high level document, it isn't getting into that. And as I said in my introduction earlier, where we've got the next stages clearly laid out in terms of area plan and action plans that will action all the directions and outcomes that we want to be achieving. We want to kind of keep this as a separate kind of document. But we thought it would be important to provide some clarity on that, so including this section.
Any comment on that change? No. Thank you for changing that then. Because we were removing the recommendation, sorry, I thought we were going to, there was all of that paragraph, but councillors, do you want to break that down separately, or are you happy that that was everything that was above the panel's recommendation? Yeah, so Ryan, we're happy with everything that sits above that box.
Yeah. Okay, we can keep moving through again.
Yeah.
Unless there's any other thing that a councillor identified in a submission that they felt wasn't covered.
No, we're good. I think we'll
Yeah.
move on to the next one.
So next was council focus. So there was a number of suggestions, especially around kind of affordability and making sure that it represented the people's perspectives. Overall, there was no recommendations proposed. There was discussion around putting affordability in the vision, but my recommendation was that livability and its sort of usage in that sentence sort of appropriately covers affordability. So my recommendation was to make no changes based on those points.
Okay, councillors, how did you view that change? Supportive? Any other comments?
I just got one,
Yeah.
just about the alignment to government priorities. Are we happy that there is an alignment, or that it's robust enough to be any government priorities that change?
Yep, I don't know if George to.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor Dean. I think it's there are some specific directions in the strategic framework that would align with some central government priorities, and some of the language is kind of lifted verbatim from some national requirements, such as to protect highly productive land, but also there's the local voice, and our outcomes and aspirations are also recorded in the framework. So there is a tension through the framework about what we are required to do and also what our communities want to see. And I think they do coexist quite well through the framework. And I think the agility is in the framework enough that we can pivot and respond to some of the changes from central government. And we've also discussed the process for when we do have changes to legislation or other instruments and direction, that there's a process to look at the framework of Waikirikiri, Kitua, Future Selwyn, and make sure that it is agile and can be adapted. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Megan.
My only comment would be like words really matter. And so when I went through the document and thought, right, well, how do we incorporate affordability? Because it was actually quite a big part of the hearing talking about affordability. At the end of the day, I stopped and I thought actually livability is probably better at a strategic level than affordability, because affordability might actually, if this is going to sit at an overarching level, then livability probably is more right for the Selwyn district, and the word affordability might be right for another district. So I just wanted to let you know that actually I went through all the wording and I assessed it and agree with where you've landed with the livability wording, and it does encapsulate it.
Thank you, Megan. Sophie.
Hello, gentlemen. Just thinking, because there has been all of this kororo around affordability and whether that's a better word or needs to be in there as well. We've got a list of key terms, and I'm just wondering whether livable or livability could be added to the key terms, and then there we can, elaborate a bit more on what we are using for that word. What's contained within that phrase.
We're happy to make that recommendation if the panel recommends it.
I think it's just a change to a glossary term, really, isn't it, within the document? So fairly minor change. Yeah, you can just make that.
It will involve a definition though as well, won't it? So it's not just a change. I'm not saying I don't agree with it, but it's more than just putting a word, adding a word to.
So we're not approving the entire document today,
No.
are we? So if it was something that was highlighted when it comes to the full council meeting, then we can make sure we've read through it. And
It's not such a substantive change we'd need to have another conversation about, other than just when you bring it together.
No, but
there's been a lot of conversation. I think everyone knows what we're trying to achieve there. It's just, just encapsulate it.
But it's also picking up, just my point is picking up, Megan is very right about words do matter, and the whole thing and how it relates and what you've actually put in there.
Yeah.
And quite often you'll have to go back to what the actual definition says and stuff like that.
Just deal with what we're asking.
Yes, it is clear. I just wanted to preface that we do have a further recommendation, and it's related to Te Reo Māori, that we're going to go through the document and look for any opportunity to expand on the key terms to provide greater clarity for users of Waikirikiri ki tour. So we will take this korero out now around livability and incorporate it into that recommendation that we already have. We haven't provided what key terms we'll be adding. That will be a bit of work that we'll do before it comes back to you on the 23rd of October, and we will provide a clear outline of what's changed and what we've included in the key terms beyond what's in the draft. No.
Thank you. So the panel's recommendation is to add that glossary term, which will be reported back to next council, and approve the recommendations of staff. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Carried. And I'm just using the same mover and seconder for each of those documents through the whole document today. So if you guys are happy with that, till we get there, we don't have to keep redoing that. Ryan?
Thank you. Yep. Right, so the next one was the use of Te Reo and Te Ao Māori principles throughout this strategy. We received a number of submissions, both in support and kind of questioning its use. We responded with, I guess, a range of reasons for our position, including sort of te tiriti responsibilities, relationship with the local hapu, runanga, and previous sort of commitments as council to some of these principles. Therefore, we're kind of happy with our current position on the use of those of the language and the principles. Other than, I think, further down, as George mentioned, we are looking at clarifying key terms, and a lot of those would be around the, especially Te Reo terminology to kind of assist people in kind of navigating and understanding.
Any comments from members? Thank you, Megan.
Well, I would just say I agree with that. If we're not going to use Te Reo in New Zealand, where are we going to use it? So agree with the recommendation, and also support the glossary. I think that will be really helpful for people who aren't familiar with terms to actually become more familiar with terms. So yeah, agree with that.
Yep, thank you. Any other comments? No? All those in favour say aye. That we don't make any changes and support the staff's recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. So the next one was transport, and that kind of encompassed a range of things. There was public transport, as we heard at the hearing, was a big one, especially for rural communities. There was discussion around the roading infrastructure, needing better kind of improving our roading conditions, better active modes as well. It also very much is linked with urban planning and growth with a lot of the submissions, and also equity inclusivity. A lot of the submissions probably moved more into the area plan level information, and while there's a lot of good stuff there, we felt it wasn't directly related to the kind of updating anything in the strategy or Waikirikiri to a future Selwyn as a whole, but it was useful information that will kind of carry down into kind of informing those area plan level decisions. We acknowledge, especially around the public transport and the mass rapid transit, with kind of ongoing conversations with council, with Environment Canterbury, was highlighted. So once again, there wasn't any recommended changes based on those, but there was a lot of good information that we can carry forward.
Thank you, councillors. Any views on that level of where we keep this discussion? Is at a higher level than getting into the area plans at this point in time, particularly, and those other points Ryan's mentioned? Sophie.
Yeah, so I've got no problem with what you've got in here and not seeking any changes. There's just one wee paragraph in here that maybe go, because it mentions submissions included something about stricter road laws, which obviously we can't do anything about. But it's the next sentence says this will be done in future work programs, including the area plan. I know that isn't reflected in the strategy. It's just pointing out we can't actually change road laws.
Yeah, no, that's, yeah, a lot of speed. I mean, the only thing we do have some control over, I guess, well, it's not a speed law, there's speed limits, could be related, but yes, I mean, I agree that a lot of that is beyond council's control. But it could, in a way, advocacy is something that we can do, and that's similar with ECAN's provision of public transport. It's something we might not necessarily be able to control, but continue to advocate for the kind of the voices of our people.
So the recommendation is that we support councillors, we support staff's recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
So a big one was urban form and urban sprawl. Obviously, that's a big topic for the district. So on the whole, most were against kind of just letting sprawl go unchecked. Kind of summarise the general views. There was some people who did say kind of, especially for Rolleston, just kind of let it go. But a lot of others were saying kind of we need to kind of find balance. Those who did kind of look for, were in support of high density, were looking to, saying do it in the appropriate locations, rather than just sort of unbalanced, just anywhere. We do have, so the recommendations were not to make any changes based on this information. We do have a balance within the strategy of acknowledging that greenfield will continue to be an aspect of growth, but also it's something we're very good at doing regardless, or it's very good at happening in the district regardless. So the focus probably needs to be more on enabling the infill development, which we are only just starting to see the sort of first fruits of at the moment. But yeah, we feel that the balance between the two, there isn't sort of a position where we're saying yes, like stop either one, but just be more considered in how we approach it.
Thanks, and I guess that this needs to be written alongside the Greater Christchurch spatial plan as well. That this isn't trying to come in over the top and trump something that hasn't already been discussed in the Greater Christchurch space. I think it's a really important distinction that you've made there, that around it's both, but actually we're looking at and that's what the Greater Christchurch spatial plan has tried to say. And we know that in the world at the moment there's fast track processes and there's announcements by ministers of development on the edge of existing townships, and all those things might be coming, but as a strategic direction, our view is that this is still the right way for us to be leading that conversation. Any further thoughts or comments of people in general agreement with what's been presented? Those,
sorry, that's just about got it. I guess the urban expanse, we need to probably avoid just using the term Rolleston, because the urban expanse is all of our urban areas, and while Rolleston's growing at a certain pace, so is Lincoln, so is Darfield, so is everywhere else. So
Yeah, agreed. So that was more because there was a submission that spoke. But yes, it is very much an issue for many of the townships.
Okay. All those in favour and support of the staff recommendation say aye. Anyone against? It carries.
Another big topic that came through from a number of submissions was disadvantaged people, and making sure that that Waikirikiri tour, which Selwyn does respond and is inclusive of all peoples, particularly Linda Clock and the CTS Disability Action Group, who presented at the hearing. They were making sure, or wanted to make sure, that it wasn't just for the sort of the majority of people, but for those sort of who are less service often in kind of urban development in many other ways, particularly those with mobility issues, but also kind of other disadvantages or such as around safety. So I was very much in agreement with those submissions and felt that while there was nothing that was kind of not doing that, I thought that providing a bit stronger of a emphasis on that would just kind of really elevate that and make sure that it's front and centre of mind as we make decisions going forward. So I made several suggestions of changes, or a couple. So the first is just in the vision of Selwyn, including all our lives. So there are reasonably minor changes in terms of wording, but I think they kind of have a lot stronger impact than just the amount of words used. And similarly, in paragraph 2 of the vision, it's a place where all people feel they belong, just to reinforce that view.
Okay, Nicole.
I think it's a really good one that you've put in, because we really want to bring everyone with us together. And the equitable piece is really important to have in as well. So that's good to see that we've taken those things on board.
Thanks, Nicole. Phil.
I guess when I hear terms like we're all equal, we're all equitable, I sometimes wonder whether that's can be misused, and you often see where they talk about this, it's followed by Selwyn is a place for all, regardless of race, ethnic, sexual orientation, religion, all that stuff there that follows. I guess by just saying all, it's look, it's a great sentence, and the philosophy is there. I don't know. It could go through. I suppose I throw that out there for just talking really more than anything else. So,
Thanks, Phil. Megan.
Well, actually, my comments were actually on the word equitable. And so I wanted to say I prefer that word than equal, because equitable means something completely different.
Yeah.
And it actually means where there's an opportunity to give disadvantage an opportunity to become equal, then equitable is absolutely the right word. I think if we had used words like equal, then we might have been disadvantaging the community that need a little bit more support than others. And I would say that equitable is not just for people who have mobility issues. It's for all people who need more support than others. So really support that word equitable. And I think that your other just adding a word all makes a substantial difference. So I wanted to say I agree with those changes. I got 2 big ticks from me.
Thank you. I also support the use of the word equitable. I just wonder in that sentence what it actually means, because for a place to be equitable, is that the same as opportunities being equitable for everyone? Because equitable is almost about the changes that are happening, as Megan just said, to get to a place where things are more equal. And if it was our places are distinct, livable, vibrant, resilient, and connected, equitably enriching each of our lives, or is it something about the activity and the action and the change as an equitable change rather than our places themselves are equitable? Because in the end we want to get to where people have equal access to things, but that change isn't overnight and it needs an equitable transition to get to that equal change.
Yeah, so just to clarify, are you saying that we suggesting we can kind of go away and just slightly reword that sentence?
Yeah, we won't try and re-change it now, but I just think there's something about the change that's equitable, not just that the place is equitable forever.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So we can agree sort of at this that we go away and just slightly tweak that sentence to.
Do the other panel members agree with what I'm saying?
I do. I think it does make more sense. You know how you've got your semicolon? It makes sense on the other side of that semicolon.
So yep. So on that second half of the yes. Okay. Yep. We can. So if I say restructure the first, the sentence in the first recommendation.
Yes. we said we wouldn't wordsmith in this hearing, so we're just giving you the ideas about how you can wordsmith between now and coming back to council.
And I think we're clear on sort of what you're looking for. So as long as you're happy to us to make that. Yeah.
And councillors are happy with the recommending support for the officers' recommendations for the rest of it though? Right, all those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you, Ryan.
Right, so the next section that we heard was on kind of the economy and job creation. There was a number of submissions where people were wanting kind of a stronger emphasis on kind of providing for the, I guess, economic prosperity of people within the district. There were a range of views on that. Some people were saying kind of we need to make sure that we've retained strong connections with Christchurch City to provide those jobs. Others were saying we need to be more self-reliant and provide more within the district. There was also a strong call for supporting rural economy, primary production, while others were questioning the kind of reliance on high greenhouse gas emitting industries within our district. So yeah, there was a lot of, I mean, everyone was in support of improving the economy, but how we go about it, there was quite a range of perspectives. Overall, I think the kind of direction or the Waikirikiri sort of balances those. There is sort of different things in play and things like we do have directions and outcomes that do sort of try and find that balance. Things like kind of decarbonising the economy, which is essential, and we've got kind of direction to do and responsibility, and kind of support industries to decarbonise while also remaining productive. So overall, we didn't recommend any specific changes based on these submissions received.
Okay, any comments from any of the panel? No, then we support staff's recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you.
Okay, well, flying through this is good. So we've got so housing is next. So this one is it, I guess it's a fine line between this and sort of the urban development and growth, obviously with sort of housing typologies, infill versus sprawl, closely connected to housing. But in terms of directly on housing, I think affordability and housing choice were sort of the main submissions that came through. Making sure some were sort of affordability for smaller towns and Lincoln University students as well within Lincoln, and just making sure that we provide kind of a range of housing for that wider wider needs. I don't think it was explicitly said, but that could also include sort of a range of different aging, being able to age in place for, and not just providing sort of single standalone designed for small families. And once again, this touched on kind of disability, making sure, which I think we heard at the hearing about making sure that kind of houses are designed to be accessible to all. So there was some stuff about like rural housing. It wasn't really clear whether they're meaning kind of, I guess, farm housing or kind of small kind of rural township housing. They were talking about Taitapu and other submission points. So I think that sort of sums it up overall. Obviously we've got a lot of directions and submissions around that. George, you have some?
Yeah, regarding the rural housing submission points and the ambiguity, that's related to there being one of the main outcomes being a sustainable and connected urban form. Urban form has a definition in the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, and ultimately we're applying that and carrying it over and extending beyond the Greater Christchurch portion of the district to where that direction and our own place-based local direction is relevant. But urban form is about the built environment. It's not about what you might consider traditionally as urban. It's about towns, communities, where there's a shop and a dairy. So it's not what you consider as urban as in cities or large towns. It's about the built environment. With that key term of urban form, when you read the direction on the urban form, it understands it applies to what's considered more rural service townships as well. So I just wanted to clarify that because it was really important that we heard from our rural communities about that, and they saw themselves in the framework, particularly when they see something sustainable and connected urban form. The questions came up, well, what about us? And so we haven't recommended any changes to that.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
How does the potential granny flat changes fit nicely into our overarching policy direction with this housing?
That's a really good question. So in the framework under housing, we have housing choice and affordability. My understanding of that MB proposal at the moment is it's about increasing supply, and that's a key part of one of our directions to enable sufficient development capacity, provide for housing choice, and that's all the housing types and different ways of living. So that would be rural residential living in appropriate locations, and then infill, which essentially the granny flats is about making a more productive use of an existing site. So I think our framework is at a particularly high level, but it would accommodate that granny flat change because it currently the framework would already satisfy medium density residential standards in our medium density residential zone in the partial operative district plan, as well as for other district plan zones. Minor residential units. So we already have provisions in the district plan to support that, and I don't think the framework does anything that would not support that or any changes to. Yeah, but that's a really good question. Thank you.
Sophie.
Yeah, just thinking about that discussion about the urban form and looking again at the key terms, just wondering whether that might be something to wordsmith in there because it does refer to towns and cities. Obviously, we don't have any cities in this district, and not all of our settlements consider themselves to be towns. Like Colgate, for instance, probably is a town, and we don't really use the word village either. So is it worth, instead of towns and cities, just say something like settlements of all sizes, or from small to large?
That's a really good point.
More inclusive.
Thanks, Sophie. I said I like your steer on this. It'd be really helpful because we've uplifted the key terms of the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, and we haven't changed the language to make the documents consistent. So it might be that if we were to provide a definition, it might be something around built environment rather than urban form, because there's an urban form definition in the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. We could perhaps do an extension to it, recognising that the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan urban form definition is about Greater Christchurch, whereas we've got to extend it to the wider Waikirikiri Selwyn. So we could look at some options there, but I would just perhaps caution changing a definition in a document that this is meant to align with.
As part of that, like if there's an additional term though that wasn't required in the Greater Christchurch work, and settlement could be that term if that wasn't used in the Greater Christchurch work, then that just refers to places, where people have decided to congregate to live. Is there a way of not contradicting, but because the scope of this work is slightly broader, to add something else in?
Yeah, I think there's scope to probably like we're extending the kind of the physical area of what we're considering with the rest of Waikirikiri Selwyn. We can also do the same with the direction. I think maybe, I don't know whether we'll have a look at it, but we might clarify that as well, maybe at the top of the key terms that we've taken from that, but also extended, just so it's clear. That's a bit clearer.
Thank you. Sophie, that would address your concern. Thank you. Bob.
Yeah, just on the third section down, one row up, it's got promote out world identity. Should it be our, not out? Just a typo probably, but
Probably, yeah.
yeah.
Yes, thank you. It almost it certainly is a typo. Yes. Correct that, thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Megan.
It reminds me of being a school teacher. Trauma. So when I looked at your comments on housing, where I went to is I looked at the directions, all of the directions and the outcomes with the directions under each. And there's actually quite a lot in there about housing. So, and I see housing is slightly different than urban environment, urban form. And yes, of course, we've got the district plan that will be either enabling or restricting of certain types of housing, but definitely after the government's direction, more enabling. And I actually think that in all of our directions, there is so much opportunity. If this is sitting at the top of our framework for strategic priorities, and we're about to have a new committee with our Urban Development and Housing Committee, it's housing opportunities for this district to be enabling of diversity of housing choice is quite strong in all of those strategic directions. So I agree that there doesn't need to be any amendment to the strategy because it's already well covered.
Yeah, thank you. And also highlight that it's one of our key in the big printout that we've got in front of you in the strategic priorities that we're sort of moving forward with and currently sort of deep in the weeds of kind of researching. Housing is one of those, and a lot of kind of thought has been going into how we kind of look at housing going forward beyond just that beyond the urban form context, but right down to the sort of actual physical building itself.
Yep. In particular, when in this document it's enabling kāinga nuhuanga and linking it back to the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan, there was a lot of submissions in that process that said kāinga, well, it wasn't just submissions, it was actually all the pre-work that Hapu did to say kāinga nuhuanga is not just about development on marae reserves, it's about creating kāinga nuhuanga in urban environments that exist where our people actually live. So I just wanted to say that that's well covered and well supported in the strategy as well.
Thanks, Megan. Any further comments on this section? Other than that change you'll bring back to us, we support your recommendations. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
Okay, the next one, kind of community character. There was strong desire from a lot of communities, and I think we heard probably for those of you who came out to the drop-in sessions in some of the townships, it kind of came across particularly clearly there, but also in the submissions we received that people wanted to maintain character and the feel of their townships to sort of balancing the growth. This does include sort of the heritage buildings, but isn't limited to that. They wanted strong, well kept and cared for neighbourhoods, focus on safety, provision of green spaces, reduction in noise, ability for people to have their own space and privacy. I fully agree, and I think we've kind of tried to work. We've kind of, while we've kept it at a high level, we've done a bit of a small amount of sort of doing a high level sort of what different kind of communities don't want to say purpose, but sort of, well, I guess character is, and we'll be going forward, but a lot more of that will be done at the area plan stage, and we'll be doing, we're going to really invest in doing really good quality in-depth consultation with individual communities to make sure we can kind of reflect who they are and who they want to continue to be going forward as part of that. While there's a lot of good information there, I think a lot of it is probably more appropriate and will be carried forward to the area plans. There wasn't any direct sort of recommendations to sort of make changes, I don't think, around that area. So I haven't recommended any changes based on those submissions.
Tim, any comments or things that haven't been picked up you'd like to identify? We support the staff's recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
Okay, so the next one, environmental and climate change. There was some very strong points of view on this one. Some in conflict with each other, with others. Generally, there was a strong support for environmental outcomes. People were pleased to see the strength of the outcomes and the directions that we included in Waikirikiri Ki Tua Future Selwyn. Some were seeking stronger and more robust directions, but on the whole, generally it was support for what was provided. Some kind of did question around whether we're kind of getting too far ahead of ourselves or there's still uncertainty, but I think with the certainty we do have, I think we're sort of well balanced and sort of kind of progressing this as appropriate. There was promotion of kind of like solar energy, waste reduction, things like that. A lot of that can be kind of incorporated into the area plan and action plan work. Same with greenhouse gas emission. We've got kind of several directions and outcomes that are specifically targeted to kind of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but also sort of doing that in an equitable and just way, and with the intent that we can do that in a way that actually does benefit the district as well. Around that, I don't think there wasn't any recommended changes that we had.
Any comments from councillors? Elizabeth?
Yeah, so there's a reference to the Lincoln being a carbon net zero town. I wanted to ask whether we could potentially look at that, because that's quite a narrow basket really, for that township, whether we look at something more like low environmental footprint, because I think that gives us a broader range of things that come under that, and given us as an overarching policy that it gives a nicer direction for that township rather than just that little singular focus.
If it's okay, we might come back, because my recommendation, while it kind of relates to this, I have a recommendation later on to do a bit of an amendment to the Lincoln, the title and the description of Lincoln. So, I mean, we can talk about it now, or we can kind of talk about it along with those other, so kind of work it as a whole.
Yeah, potentially, yeah, because it applies to all the carbon zero stuff. I mean, having that overarching document, we really should be looking at the wider footprint as a terminology. Thank you.
Yeah, so 5.8 is we were kind of going to be touching on that, but yeah, so we'll just come back to that at that point. I think it's probably
but Elizabeth will come back.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone further on these points raised?
Okay, I just jumped in. But just to say, I always find it really interesting that there's still this real divergent view on climate change in our communities, and that it's coming through in submissions, because we're living in a different environment. So I agree that there should be no changes, but just wanted to comment that was a really interesting part of the submissions and hearings.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think probably the thing that we're wanting is that just doing it in a just and equitable way. The cost of change will not be equal across the board. So being kind of considered in how we do that is probably where we're probably having to work more on finding that appropriate response.
Thank you. So councillors, no changes here, and we support the staff's recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
Now we've kind of covered, I guess, the topic-based ones a bit more. Now we're kind of going into organisation submissions. So the organisations generally had more of a single or narrowed focus on their area of concern. Obviously, so I've kind of considered that, but there were kind of a bit of overlap between them. So I've kind of, while I've talked about them as a kind of stage, the recommendations at the end sort of incorporated a range of them. So yeah, what we heard, so just kind of go through the individual ones we did here. So Aggregate Inquiry Association talked a bit about making sure that we do consider those sort of finite resources that we have and that they are necessary to continued growth and development. And that by not doing that, it could have a sort of perverse outcome that we have to ship or kind of truck in kind of aggregates and materials from further afield, creating greater greenhouse emissions than if we have them locally. In the draft, it was kind of used, we had conserve finite resources, but we recommended a bit of a change to that to protect and enable. Oh no, that's not protect and managed. Is that not made into? Maybe there was. So there might be an issue there. So the idea, the recommendation was to do protect and manage. Maybe I didn't get that in the thing further down. I might have missed that. Apologies. But yeah, so we need to both protect it, but protect kind of implies that it's just left like with the protecting environmental kind of high environmental areas. It's like kind of just leave it alone, don't touch it, and that's not quite appropriate for aggregates because we do actually need to manage and use them. So there was a recommendation to around that. So similarly, Ag Research had submissions, had a kind of point around making sure that we kind of consider the research and education, particularly around Lincoln, and a lot of their work, which can hugely benefit the district, needs to be kind of protected from reverse sensitivity outcomes. So that links strongly with the aggregate inquiry associations of making sure that, especially with growth, that we're not kind of growing in areas that will sort of we won't shoot ourselves in the foot a bit by disadvantaging kind of areas or kind of industries that are of strong benefit. So there was a recommendation to amend the spirit of Selwyn to include research and education alongside innovation and creativity. And once again, the dairy processing, they had kind of that similar point of view that the dairy processing needs to be kind of, especially the plants need to be protected from that reverse sensitivity of township growth. Just to clarify, I think there was a bit of a misunderstanding in terms of the kind of what the dots represented on the district picture. They were intentionally not sort of scalable, or they didn't kind of change size. They aren't representative of the sort of extent of the physical township. They were kind of a representation of how they fit within the township network, and that kind of at the area plan levels we'll be kind of considering sort of where townships grow appropriately, taking into account that reverse sensitivity of those industries. Yeah, and then we heard from the Carter Group, and yeah, who are generally supportive, but wanting to make sure we do density well. I think we've kind of incorporated that well. Yeah. Yeah, National Public Health Service were generally supportive of it. Yeah, and they kind of touched on accessible, healthy, and resilient housing, and I think they're well incorporated. Orion sort of had several changes, or a good few changes they wanted to make. I think kind of maintaining the infrastructure is another key aspect, especially around electricity, but there are other services, and I think we've covered infrastructure and services well within that, without focusing on just the one aspect of electricity. So overall, there was a few changes there. So add an additional direction under a productive and low carbon and diverse economy outcome to say protect key infrastructure and resources from reverse sensitivity effects on urban growth and inappropriate activities. Amend paragraph 2 to add in sustainable infrastructure and investment, and prioritize, and then around sustainable and accessible transport, prioritise and enable sustainable transport options. So those are my recommendations based on.
There's also left out, but it's in the discussion and it's in the hearing summary report from the reporting officer, to change direction to, under the support and outcome, living within environmental limits, to conserve and manage, manage being the new inclusion, finite resources. And that's in response to the Aggregate and Quarries Association. Protect can mean maintain the status quo, but using aggregate minerals is part of sustainable urban form, and we need it to grow. So it's important that we conserve them and we use them responsibly and manage them as well. So that's not before you, but it is in the hearing summary report as well. So those are the 4 recommendations.
Thank you. Does it go far enough to allow the particularly the quarry side of things to be able to continue to operate, and for the aggregate requirements of Selwyn and Greater Christchurch to be met? Yeah. It feels like the quarry discussion is more about adverse effects on neighbours than it is on conserving a finite resource. Well, I get that it does need to be conserved, finite resource too, but at the moment we've got way too much gravel in our rivers, way too much gravel in Canterbury around flood, and actually the use of gravel is something we want to do. It's where it's appropriate, and its effects on neighbours around that space. And I just wonder whether the words that we're using there actually reflect the intent of being able to access those materials.
I think the intent was to kind of cover that through that additional direction, the protect key infrastructure and resources from reverse. So the resources would include sort of aggregates, protect them from reverse sensitivity effects, for being with growth and appropriate activities. Is that?
To me, that almost layers on another. Make sure we don't allow more gravel extraction when it might have reverse sensitivity effects on neighbours.
Right, I see. Yeah. So maybe we could reword that. My intent was to kind of protect the kind of quarrying activities from the reverse sensitivity of other activities encroaching on them, but it might not be kind of clear enough.
I hear the intent in the discussion. I just wonder if the words that we're using are actually not having the desired outcome. If we want, and it's a question. I mean, if we want to see gravel extraction used for continued, development of Selwyn, we need to have access to it, not just protect and manage. Kind of, to me, is less enabling than what I would see as current practice and what I would expect we would see into the future. I don't know how this around the table feel, and it's just I'll provide that feedback and others can comment on it. So the research and innovation, really support that being added into the piece. I think that's really important. And I wonder, and it was part of the submission around the South Island rail hub, but to me, this conversation is actually a bit bigger than that. And it's about the logistics hub for the South Island, and rail is a key component of that. So I just wonder if you could comment on how that has been captured, or whether you felt that was already captured in the previous work that we've done in response to the request around the rail hub being identified itself, future rail hub.
The Carters, So at this stage we haven't. I think the recommendation wasn't to include that because it hasn't eventuated yet, and we thought it would be until it's sort of on the ground or sort of clear. But it could be something that, once it's established as in that role, that we can kind of update, and that's the kind of the idea of Waikirikiri tour being a reasonably live document. If we can kind of consider that there's been changes that are reflective of some of these things, we can kind of come back and so we're not kind of excluding it going forward, but currently we think it's a bit maybe premature.
So is there enough in the document itself that supports the growth of Ralston and Selwyn being the logistics hub for the South Island to enable those sorts of activities to occur, or to be generally supportive of, obviously with all the detail that needs to go on in any land use change. But that's the direction of the document itself is supportive of us in the logistics space for the South Island. And so and not enabling that one piece that doesn't go against what we're trying to say in the rest of the document.
That's a really good point, Mayor Borton. We have, again, the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan has a strengthened network of town and urban centres, and that logistics hub for Ralston is identified as one of the main towns in the Greater Christchurch network alongside Rangiora. So we have our own township network. I think Ryan's has brought it up on the screen, where we are more ambitious and forward looking. We're looking at Ralston as an emerging city, just looking at our high growth projections and exceeding 50,000 people in Ralston by as early as 2047. And I think that manufacturing, logistics, the inland ports and the innovation potential of Ralston is captured in the township network description for Ralston as an emerging city in the future. So that's reflected in the township network description of Ralston as an emerging city, and also on the district picture we are showing the potential north of the state highway around the inland ports and some of the activities there, and there's a description for that as well. So
yeah, so it's, for me, it's Kiwira one day decides they need to move the Middleton operation to Selwyn. This document is obviously signaling that's a direction that generally we would be supportive of, and we would like to see that.
Yeah, and I think it doesn't. Probably the text is a bit hard to read up on the screen for you. There is and under the township network, Ralston has the opportunity to develop its commercial centres, expand on the success of the I Zone, which operates as a logistics hub, supported by the presence of the inland ports, attracting additional business investment, providing a broader range of transport and housing choices. So there is stuff there. I mean, I guess it's for you to tell us whether you think it has appropriately addressed that, and we're happy to make changes if you think they're needed. Or
no, thank you, Elizabeth.
So under the 9 protect key infrastructure and resources from reserve sensitivity effects of urban growth. So we've got urban growth, that implies that we are talking about just future growth of houses, but what about the existing properties in terms of quarries? I mean, that's already a big issue. Is that identified elsewhere in the document clearly enough? Reverse sensitivity is currently an issue. We're seeing that at Burnham, we're seeing that with all the other quarries. So how are we navigating the current trends?
Yeah, that is a tricky one because the horse has bolted a bit on that one with the housings that exist that are already sort of causing that reverse sensitivity. I'm not sure whether.
Yeah, I think there's two things we're trying to capture with the recommendations. The reverse sensitivity is about protecting operations of infrastructure, and that includes minerals and aggregate where they're already in situ and operating, and then you get the additional activities that come in and you get complaints around them. That's reverse sensitivity. So there is a kind of a first in, first served, and they should be allowed to reasonably operate and not be subject to the new entrant raising concerns. But there's that second one about conserve and manage finite resources, which includes aggregate and minerals, but all our resources, so that they are used. There's not saying a blanket no on resources. We use them in a way that's sustainable, which is conserve, and we manage them, and manage is a broad term, which will give us the direction to go forward into the area plans about saying, well, these are the areas where there's hard rock or gravel, and we should protect them because they're close to where the demand is. So that will give us the direction that staff need to develop area plans with the community. So there's kind of two parts of that covered, is what we need to do about managing the new aggregate, new quarries coming in, and that we reconcile around that tension between reverse sensitivity. So I think our recommendation, I think it captures that, and that will give direction again for the policy planning team to look at that through the district plan and what rule changes need to come. So there's two aspects that follow Waikirikiri, Kitua, Future Selwyn. There's the area plans, which are spatial plans, which are largely pictorial, visual, spatial, and then there'll be action plans, which might change things such as district plans, policies and bylaws. And I think the direction is there enough for that team to go and do the work and look at what we're seeing now on the ground.
Thank you. Sophie?
Yeah, just continuing with the quarry discussion, it's interesting that we were spending quite a bit of time on aggregates here.
Yes.
In one submission, and I get that they're a significant aspect of growth. I just wanted to add that we can't, they're not just a beneficial thing. So I appreciate the use of manage and sustainable in the wording here, because they quarries use a large quantity of water, which is then not available for agriculture or for human consumption, or just generally in the rivers for creatures that live in there. They are extremely hard to remediate. You've got a giant hole in the ground with nothing to fill it in. And attempts to remediate quarries, yes, they tried them, but quite honestly, I mean, it's taken 25, 30 years for Hamilton Nature Park to look the way that it does. And that's a really small gravel pit. The bigger ones are never going to be actually remediated. It's just not, well, we're talking centuries. And the other part of using so much aggregate, not saying that we shouldn't, because the way that things operate at the moment, we don't have any alternatives. But right now, there are no incentives for to develop alternatives. We're just going, oh, we've got heaps of gravel, especially in places like Selwyn. Let's dig it all up and use it. Which then in turn contradicts some of our other directions, like trying to avoid greenfield expansion, because literally aggregates and sand is part of how those are possible, as opposed to going, okay, manage it, use it more sustainably, and then we've got to try and stick within our limits because of other things. So I'm just trying to support keeping it more in the precautionary area of sustainable and manage, rather than accepting wholly the submission from that particular part of their industry. That is kind of like, we love your gravel, can we dig up more of it, please? It doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's not just about dust and reverse sensitivity. It actually feeds into a whole other bunch of our directions here. So yeah, I'm not asking for any changes to that. It's just more of the context around why quarries exist and what they enable.
Thanks, Sophie. Megan?
Kia ora, I've got two comments. I didn't have a comment on aggregate until Sam looked it up. So now I do. Look, my first interaction with the quarry industry, and I'll declare now, was when I was a member of the Templeton Residents Association, and we were getting a quarry next door. So, it came from a place of concern as a resident. And that's where I first met Tim Harris, and I don't think he thought it was a great first meeting. But
I remember
you were there many years ago, but I don't live there anymore. But my comment is actually now, as a commissioner looking through district plans and regional plans, the word manage is actually majority of people looking to protect reverse sensitivity. So industry looking to protect reverse sensitivity actually advocate for the word manage, because previously it was those languages of avoid, mitigate, So manage is actually enabling without it actually saying enabling. So I do support the word manage. I think that it actually gives a really balanced approach, and it seems to be where a lot of our planning regime is now moving to, because it does actually then acknowledge that sometimes it might be appropriate to carry out an activity if those adverse effects can be appropriately managed. So I think that word's good. My original comment, though, was about number 9. So I think number 9 is really good, and it does capture. Is it in that? Was that? Now, so later on, when we talk about regionally significant industry, as opposed to regionally significant infrastructure.
Yeah.
So my only comment around that was, is infrastructure the right word, or how does this relate to that submission that came through from Fonterra on industry, where Susan O'Rourke said industry is more used at that strategic level, whereas infrastructure is more used in district planning regimes. So that was kind of my question.
Yep, no, that's a good point. Thanks for raising that. I think, yeah, I think the reason I use that, and maybe it shouldn't, maybe it need to be corrected, I'll just go to is that currently the district picture was, does layer them by, like has like the key infrastructure layer, which does sort of go beyond, I guess, the normal definition of infrastructure to include things like the dairy processing plants, and a few things like that. But yeah, maybe it is appropriate to, we're open to sort of to amend that, or
I think it'd be an inclusion, but we'd retain key infrastructure for those more traditional infrastructure that we look to protect that were in the list. But yeah, industry would.
Sorry, I actually wanted to add to that. It was something that I was looking at as well as what Megan's talked about. But we've got important infrastructure in the district plan, and that includes the dairy processing ones. It doesn't specifically include quarries, but it actually says at the top, those necessary facilities, services and installations which are critical or of significance to either New Zealand, Canterbury or Selwyn. These may include, but are not limited to, this list. Quarries isn't part of that list, but I don't know. And because that was a question that I was going to ask as well, is that.
Should we come back there? I just want to do a response here to Megan. I just want to hear the rest of that response and then add anything that you've got as well, Nicole. George, you were saying
he was talking about a totally different, I mean, word is key infrastructure, which is a different word again. And I'm trying to say that this might be better aligned with what we've already got in place, being important infrastructure, because the district plan normally would come out of the strategic work that we've already done, but we've already gone through this whole process of doing the district plan. Why don't we use what we've already got instead of introducing new terms? I don't know, but that's my suggestion.
Well, and I think we're talking about the same thing here.
Yes, and that's why I said why it's interrupted. Sorry, but it totally lines up with what Megan was saying.
So what I would say, I do think it's important to use same terms. It is helpful. What if this is changed though? So what will happen? Yes, we go through a district plan review every 10 years, but then there's going to be plan changes that come along, and this strategy might be more enabling or restrictive that might guide those kind of decisions. So, but I wasn't quite sure about even the word infrastructure, because to me, when the discussion that we had with Susan O'Rourke was to say infrastructure is great when we're talking about a district plan and planning rules, but actually what we're talking about at a strategic level is we want our whole industry to be protected. And she said, so you might ordinarily think of the plant processing as the infrastructure, but it's actually equally the farms, the individual farms at a strategic level. That is why she thought industry was more appropriate. And it might be fine to have both words in there, but industry was, she explained, a whole lot more inclusive. And then my next thought about that was, it's like regionally significant infrastructure is always defined in a regional rule or a district plan, but are we talking about regionally significant industry, or are we talking about district significant industry? And is there actually a difference here? Because there's some things that will be really important to us here in Selwyn that might not be regionally significant. And I know you said, Sam, we need to email our points through in advance, and this is actually raising a thing, but you did the aggregate, so I'm doing the industry. But I just think maybe industry would be appropriate in here somewhere.
I'd agree with industry, and for the reasons that you've stated there about the whole wraparound. I wonder if infrastructures that we're getting into the weeds a little bit on definitions, because the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan has key infrastructure as a strategic document that does transcend different statutory RMA planning documents, because obviously the whole of the partnership are part of that, but that has key infrastructure, and that has led key strategic infrastructure in the Greater Christchurch Spatial Plan. We've introduced key infrastructure. Councillor Reid rightly identified important infrastructure. District plan, there's also development infrastructure and national policy statement for urban development and local infrastructure, community infrastructure, social infrastructure. So there's a lot of terminology out there in the RMA context. So I suppose our key infrastructure is a broad umbrella term that captures a lot of those RMA statutory definitions, and it gives us that latitude to pick up a lot of stuff that's in there. And the industry, I think, would be an inclusion, because some of the key infrastructure includes say the New Zealand Defence Force sites, and it would include justice and correction facilities. So I think industry completely agree, and we can look at that. But I think protect infrastructure, industry it would be an addition rather than replacement, perhaps. Just as a recommendation on the fly there, it would be an and rather than an or. Yeah.
Do you want to just note the changes then that you're going to consider, either this coming back to us in the box so we can see what that looks like? And generally there's support for the overall recommendations that you've.
So what do we going through what we're doing? Include industry in number 9. And I think there was support for manage, and I think Megan's experience in the commissioner space talks about, the effects management hierarchy. Gives us, again, as a strategic document, a lot of latitude to see what's appropriate where in what context. So which is why the language is put forward.
Good industry in just 9, and what was the something else?
I think that covers it. That was really the only change. The rest was discussion from the group, I think. Councillors, anything further? All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
So I think we had morning tea booked in for about 10:30, so we can do that now, or we can.
Do you feel like we're about halfway through the amount of work that we've got and number of slides we are? But
I think the well, I mean, my thought was that the kind of complexity would be front ended with some of the things, but
we might slightly more than half an hour's work, so let's take a break and come back to it fresh in 20 minutes. Let's adjourn and we'll start again at 10:50. I hand back over to you.
Thank you. All right, I'll just get myself. Okay, so now we've we've just finished with the organisations. We're kind of going through the, I guess, the structure of a strategy part of Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn, and sort of looking at submissions that were received that spoke more specifically to those aspects. Some of them do sort of touch on some of the stuff we've already covered, but these are ones that are a bit more specific to that. So the first one is the vision and the spirit. So there was a stronger, so there was a bit of a call for a stronger focus on rural communities, received from a number of submitters, some feeling that it was too urban focused, and not enough appropriate consideration was given to the small towns and the rural communities. So yeah, and submitters like Horticulture New Zealand felt the word productive should be added to the vision to highlight the importance of primary production, domestic food supply, and the role of the rural environment. So yeah, overall, so I did make, while I feel like overall the strategy itself does actually give a very wide scope to and isn't too focused. There's very little mention of Rolleston and Lincoln specifically, or large townships. People kind of, I guess, might read into that, and I thought there would be benefit in being a bit more explicit that the small towns and rural areas are just as valued. So to respond to these submissions, I've suggested that in the paragraph 1 of the Spirit of Selwyn section, that an additional line be included, which is the character of small towns is cherished and our rural areas are valued for farming and food production. So that's sort of the one addition that I thought would be appropriate to include in that.
Any views? Phil? We've got Lydia first, but is that just because you're...
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Switch out my things. I'm Lydia for the day.
I guess I was just, I like the fact that it says that the character of our small towns is cherished. And I wonder if, as we grow, whether that's, because we've already talked about how we're going to be growing, and as we grow, our small towns are going to be growing too. And how do we allow the growth, but at the same time, I wonder whether we're setting a trap for ourselves for the future. I don't know what the answer is, because it's like, it would be nice, something to, the character of our small towns is important. And we acknowledge that we will do everything we can to maintain those characters, but ultimately the character of those small towns may change. And yeah, that's my thoughts about the protection as we get forward.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. I think you've actually raised a really, really good point, because this is there's a tension there about how we evolve but retain, and what's going too far and you lose sight of yourself and what came in the past. And Waikirikiri Tour Future Selwyn does kind of, not in the strategic framework itself, but talks about, well, this is about long-term future, 50 to 100 years, and things are going to change over that time, but we also need to look back in order to walk forwards, and there's that whakatauki around that. And I think what's it's quite interesting how we balance that, and it is a balance about evolving, changing over time, also not losing sight of ourselves. So we do have directions that sit under the spirit, which is about reflecting our arts, our traditions, recognise our communities, rural identity, but also allowing for change. So it's going to be something that will keep bringing back in all the work that sits under Waikirikiri Ki Tua Future Selwyn, and we'll be looking at how those outcomes and the directions will be reconciled. But something interesting to reintroduce some of the direction in the RMA space in the National Policy Statement for Urban Development. It talks about amenity, and that's usually been used as a way to keep the status quo and not change. But there's a objective there about amenity values will change and grow over time in response to the diverse and changing needs of people. And I think that is reflected in the spirit and throughout the whole framework. But it is a point of tension, and it's going to require some decisions on how that plays out, but it's getting the balance right. I think the framework again gives the latitude for us to have those decisions as they arise. We'll take those decisions as they arise.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
I hear what Phil's saying on that. I don't see cherished as being too restrictive as a word, because it still does allow for development, but it does say that we recognise that even if you are small, you're still valued in the community. We're not just got this wider urbanisation focus. As a Selwyn district, as a council, we're actually looking at small towns that are still being important to us in a district plan.
Yeah, and I agree and reiterate what George said. I think at the area plans, we are going to be doing more engagement, like I touched on at the start, with all the townships, and kind of try and get communities to, because it would be, we don't want to get us ahead of ourselves and decide what those are before. I mean, it's for them to decide, and I think there was sort of a bit of that reflected in the submissions, that it's for the communities to decide what is valuable and what should be cherished. For some townships that might not grow hugely, that it might be kind of a sustaining thing, but for others, as they do grow, they don't want to just be replaced with a new identity necessarily. So kind of finding a way to kind of connect and hold on to what they value is what we'll be working towards.
Thank you. I just wondered whether we have said small towns are cherished, and we haven't gone into why they're cherished, but then we've said rural areas are valued, and then have gone into why they're valued. Is that intentional to try and pull those out at this high level, like in the statement that sort of is at the front end of things, those two particular areas around farming in general and food production, not mentioning fibre? Like, is there reasons for the use of that language?
I think, some of it was responding to submissions received. I think, like I said, with the small towns, there's a lot of small towns that all have very different, have very different views of what they cherish for their communities. The rural area, there's still separate identities and sort of parts of the district that are individual, but from the submissions we received, and I think it was from the Ellesmere
Sustainable agriculture, I think.
Yeah. They kind of talked about these are the values that we're wanting to that they kind of told us that I guess high level for a wide group a bit more. There could be more latitude in terms of that farming, food production that kind of covers everything. You
talked about immunity before, and I wonder whether actually the thing that people like about farms, like they do like that produces food, but actually they like the green space. They like being able to drive and see open landscape and mountains, and that the idea of green and the immunity feel that the rural parts of Selwyn provide. I think matters to many people that don't necessarily connect it straight back to the farming and the food piece. Like, I think the food is very specific. There's a very specific reason why we want to support it, which is good. I support that, but there's other less tangible reasons why we should value our rural areas.
Yeah, I jump in there. I'd agree with that. I think what came out through the submitters and what Ryan, as the reporting officer, is trying to respond to is that inherent feeling of vulnerability around food security and providing for food in the future. And yeah, but your point around fibre and being part of the sustainable future, that's really important as well. And yes, there's the amenity and tourism and dark sky. I do value our rural areas for lots of reasons beyond just farming and food production. So perhaps if the panel were to support it, we could look to have the character of a small towns and church, and our rural areas are highly valued for, and then perhaps some language around that. But it's really broad why we value our rural areas, not just farming and food production. I think Ryan was looking to just respond to all the submission points, which did focus on food, and that's very important too. So we could look to amend the language.
And if you can, great. And if you can't, then we'll find it out when you come back and it's on the agenda. But if you could just leave some flexibility in there for that change would be helpful.
Yeah. Let's have another level. I think actually I'm going to break into two parts. That was actually this was the second part I was going to talk about, because environmentally and economically and in tourism space, our rural areas have three different meanings. And so we need to, you're right, in terms of the economy, farming and food production. But when it comes to the environment, I mean, it's completely different to that. I mean, we've got the beautiful rivers that runs right through us, and that's not about food and farming. But what I want to get back to the first one about cherishing and us, particularly our small towns, just I wonder whether there's any space, and I wonder if there's any palette around the table to somehow at a high level to say that we will allow our communities to determine what is cherished about their space. So, like, I mean, it basically it means at the strategic level we're saying that we will allow the community voice to guide us through that, as opposed to us cherishing it as part of strategy. Thank you.
It's not in front of you regarding this recommendation, but the widest spirit of Selwyn includes a section about local voice being loud and being heard. So it might not be adjoined to this particular aspect of our communities being involved in stating what is cherished, but it does come later. And well, I think it is sufficiently captured. Perhaps we could look to make it more explicit, or take your steer. But there is a quite important statement about providing for community voice, and it's loud and it's heard. And
if it's in there somewhere else, then I guess it's in somewhere else. So, yep.
Okay, thank you. So we're leaving just a little bit of flexibility around that sentence, and if you can find some new wording, otherwise we generally support the recommendations and changes as proposed. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
Right, so yeah, so still in that high level in the vision and vision and spirit section. The next sort of topic that did come up was environmental considerations. There are a number of submitters felt that the environment warranted sort of extra strong emphasis, or us sort of maintaining and protection of the environment needed to be strongly felt high up in the document, particularly around Te Waihora and the Waikirikiri River. There was appreciation for the focus of mana whenua relationships, that connection, Te Ao Māori. There was some concern that the language that was used was too vague. I guess didn't have enough teeth in some people's eyes, and didn't address things like loss of native vegetation, things like that. The spirit does identify protection and care for the environment. Some of the language that we used was intentionally trying to be a positive language. You can kind of frame things as kind of, I guess, in a negative or positive way. We tried to err on the side of the positive to achieve things. So things like vegetation loss or emissions isn't directly addressed, but I think there's other references within those parts that does sort of capture that. So things like kind of growing in harmony with Te Tatao, the natural world, and collectively caring for different aspects of the environment, and that kind of carries down through into the directions and outcomes as well. So yeah, well, I very much agree that the kind of environment, kind of making sure that we work within our environment and that we are reliant on it, that I feel that that no changes need to be made.
This is when you told me to come. No, with my suggestions earlier.
Sorry, I think also that was in refer to Lincoln University. Did you the kind of changes on Lincoln
Township? But yeah, just in general, where you've got a low carbon. Low carbon is just one aspect of the whole sustainability model, and I felt that putting changing those references to making it broader, because this is a broad overview of having low environmental footprint being a more all-encompassing directive suggestion.
Yeah, so we'll touch on it's at the township network 5.8 that will kind of look at the individual township descriptions, which will be kind of like include the Lincoln description.
Yep, I just was that. And just in general, you do have low carbon. That's like, as I said, that's only one fragment of the entire sustainability model. And low carbon really, I feel, across the whole of this strategic document should be encompassing the low environmental footprint.
So was there any recommended changes that you're looking to make, or so in terms of throughout the document doing that environmental I mean, we can kind of put it if the panel's happy to, we can kind of address
What are the specifics that we're going to do? So if you did, so we're going to.
I'm happy to go after Elizabeth.
Okay, fine.
I'm just reiterating that when it says low carbon, it's only one measurement, one aspect of the whole sustainable movement. If we're changing that out so it's broader and encompasses many different aspects of sustainability options that we want to be reflecting in this document, it's better to have an all-encompassing term like low, what was it said? Low environmental footprint.
And there's stuff you think that there is a term or there's something that we can use that can reflect that level of change?
I agree with Elizabeth that low carbon is one aspect of a wider environmental, like freshwater quality and looking after our natural environment isn't part of low carbon, so it needs to be broader. At the moment, the high level outcome, or the outcome, Ryan's recommendation is to have support in outcomes and outcomes, is a healthy and restored environment. And there is decarbonize the economy under a regenerative economy. So we have low carbon net zero town, which we'll get to around Lincoln, and Ryan has recommended a change for that, and we'll put that recommendation to the panel. We also have broader sustainability. We have a sustainable connected urban form. So I suppose there is different language used in different contexts throughout. So there's a broader sustainability element in terms of a healthy and restored environment. And then in that urban context, I think is where we have the only mention I can recall of low carbon is livable low carbon towns, which is one of the supporting outcomes, which has directions about sustainable and accessible transport and about different housing typologies being affordable and quality and of choice. But yes, carbon is only one element. Decarbonisation is one element of a broader environmental aspect of Waikirikiri, Kitura, Future Selwyn. But we can look through the languages where low carbon is mentioned and check that it's robust and sufficient enough to capture the wider environmental sustainability. Yeah, so we can look at for sure.
Thank you. Sophie.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I can see the point of wanting to react it broadly, but there's points where this is so big that the entire document actually is covering the wider sustainability part. And if we're talking about changing, I mean, this is literally the headings of the directions that if you remove low carbon, there's two of them in there, and then it's not actually the document that we consulted on anymore. Or, that's actually quite a significant change. It's not just tweaking some of the wording of the the outcomes that are underneath it's actually changing the directions. Which I know because there's so many of those other aspects. I mean, there's a fantastic visual which is talked about carbon tunnel vision, and it has this image of a person who's just staring at greenhouse gas emissions, and then all around him is all of those other things that is to do with living sustainably. But actually, I feel like we've got all the rest of them are in there anyway. It's just that they're not in that particular wording right there, but it's quite clear from the rest of the document that that is covered. We're not just targeting emissions. So I'm actually okay with sticking with low carbon because it's something that a lot of people will understand, and the rest of the context is there if they choose to read the rest of the document or as they live in our district while we're implementing this.
Yeah, I think I think there's I guess the point in I don't have we've got the kind of triangle where we've got the vision and the spirit at the top, and it kind of spreads out. I think as we get down, we need to be more specific. There's times where it's like we need to actually focus on reducing carbon, but there's also other very important things, just as important things, and things like within the supporting outcome of living within our environmental level that starts to pick up, or a healthy and restored environment. There's a outcome does talk to things, but there's points where further down we need to pull out specific targets, otherwise we just stay in the clouds. But I think probably towards the top we need to kind of make sure that we're using the language that's sort of wider encompassing at the higher levels so that we have that scope further down, so it's a natural kind of progression. I think that might be what, without speaking for you, that was what Elizabeth was, so we can definitely look at that.
Yeah, we have two mentions of low carbon, so my apologies. Livable low carbon towns as a support and outcome, and a productive low carbon and diverse economy. So the supporting outcomes, which are a part of a regenerative economy, is the main outcome, and a healthy and restored environment. And Ryan just mentioned there's other outcomes and directions which do cover the aspect which isn't about decarbonisation. So it'd be good to get your steer if those two mentions are okay, and if it's the rest of the outcomes and directions are broad enough to capture the wider environmental sustainability considerations. Elizabeth?
So on that note, is it our role to be addressing GHG emissions for agriculture? Is that our role as council? Because I feel that that's outside of our scope.
Which ones is that? Is that direction that was there? Or?
Yeah, so on page 20, you go up. So it's directions 1 and 2. And then you go, while direction 1 and 2 of a productive low carbon and diverse economy addresses agriculture GHG emissions and the need to decarbonise in general. I'm just saying, is it within our scope to actually include agriculture GHG emissions? I would have thought that's outside of our scope at council to be setting those targets.
It might just help to say, when it comes to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, we are actually under central government directive to make sure that our planning regime actually enables that. So it probably is. It's all greenhouse gas emission. Yeah.
Including transport.
Yeah.
We don't have I don't know if that's regarding discussion in the officers' reports, but we have decarbonised the economy and having I think another direction around this. The rural economy is productive, resilient, sustainable. We don't have any explicit mention of reducing greenhouse gas emissions for agriculture, recognising in the national, we have the Paris Agreement, national determined contributions, and then we have domestic targets, and there's a split gas approach as well as a different approach for agricultural emissions at that national level. We just have a broad direction on decarbonise the economy, nothing specific on agriculture or greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture.
Yeah, so I do say it does say that in my text, and I think that maybe I was a bit misleading in how I kind of framed that sentence. I think it was, it doesn't directly say, there's no direction directly saying to reduce agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, but I think there's just in there, what like George was saying, the wider kind of target of doing that as a whole, it's sort of encompassed.
So you're just going to alter that bit there then, so it's a bit more.
I think it's in Ryan's, oh, sorry, Elizabeth, my apologies. I think it's in Ryan's discussion, but in the draft, it's the direction would be decarbonise the economy. There's no explicit mention of industries, sectors, or a time limit. You know, we haven't got like a 2050 target for ourselves in there, and all the methane target being percent below like reflecting their national targets. It's decarbonise the economy. I suppose the pace and scale of change, and when we work with our communities and how we do that, will be the area plan and action plan discussion. We just got that broad direction to decarbonise the economy.
So are we still going to review whether we reference low carbon wording? That was the request at the beginning, and then
Yeah, I think we'll do a review. I think at the high level, I think, like I mentioned, once we get further down into the directions and stuff, it's sort of broken down appropriately to sort of each aspect has been highlighted and pulled out and is specific, but we'll just do a look at those high levels in the vision and make sure that the language there is appropriate so that it can kind of scale down.
right, so there may not be changed, but you're going to take that.
Yeah, and we'll confirm at the.
Thank you. And generally, the rest of that recommendation we're supportive of, councillors, around the change, or around the no change, not recommending any further change from the staff perspective. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? That carries.
Yeah, so there's this final bit of this of that first vision and spirit section. There was a few other submissions that we did receive more generally. There was a number of people who wanted to sort of add additional language in. We touched on one of them being in the affordability. Another one is kind of around prosperous, sustainable, healthy, equitable. There's while they're all great terms, I guess the point of the vision is we want it to be a clear, snappy thing that has to encompass a very wide ranging kind of the rest of everything that's encompassed within Waikirikiri to a future Selwyn. So we were reasonably to kind of keep it succinct. We tried to use language that did kind of encompass wide things with that, especially like livability, connected. While all those things are valuable and I think are affected throughout the strategy, we thought, that they're encompassed enough within the wording we did choose, and therefore we didn't think that it was appropriate to sort of add any more words in.
Any views on?
So I can pull up the.
Sorry.
So I'll just pull up the so that the aspirations, the vision, and the spirit are there, just for your to help. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so we stuck with just livable, innovative, and connected Waikirikiri Selwyn, filled with opportunity and prosperity.
I think something key to mention is this is all composite of the strategic framework. So where there are where submitters did feel that the vision could have additional word to cover a different aspect, the idea is that the spirit should give that narrative and understanding of how that applies where people live and where they work and spend time, and then it is kind of a narrative in the spirit. So we have the outcomes framework, the outcomes, support and outcomes and directions, and a lot as what's come through as adding additional words to the vision. We considered that the framework sufficiently would cover those aspects that they feel are missing or could be better represented, but that's part of the strategic cascade, and the framework is the vision is that short, concise statement, so we know what Waikirikiri Kitua Future Selwyn is all about. The spirit gives you that description of how that plays out or may look and feel in the future, because it's a future aspiration captured in the framework, and then the outcomes and directions are really explicit directions that could guide LTP community outcomes and some of the work that we do to implement and move towards the vision and the spirit. So I would just make the panel aware of when we're adding words, it might be that it's reflected in the framework and elsewhere, and the language is forward in the vision, so it's accessible and is broad enough to cover different aspects of the framework.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Just bearing in mind that affordables come up a lot of times, and we've decided as a council that livable is suitable to include affordable, but that really needs to be reflected in a glossary. Because if not, people are going to keep coming back with what does livable mean. It's going to mean different things to different people, and I think affordable is clearly a hot topic right now. So we need to make sure that that's totally encompassed in this document.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, and I think we might have recorded that at the top end, but yeah, we'll definitely kind of include that.
Okay, recommendation is that we don't change anything as a result of the above submissions. Any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
Right, so now moving on to the framework and outcomes. So this just had a bit more general discussion. So Ryan had a number of suggestions around energy efficient. Energy efficient into the low carbon towns and outcomes discussion. Outcomes. Also several other changes to directions under a productive low carbon diverse economy. So a bunch of different directions. All sort of focused around making sure that was around that efficiency, 100% renewable electricity generation. And while we agree that, especially going forward, electricity is going to be an essential part of ensuring that we've got a healthy, productive, livable, especially with moving away from gas, carbon emitting energy sources, that it is sort of just one aspect of it, and that at this higher level, we don't want to be it's sort of too high a level to be focusing purely down onto one industry or aspect of it. We've got plenty of things around infrastructure, quality infrastructure, which achieves all plus other ones that Orion was suggesting. So we felt that it was well encompassed. ESI, Ellesmere Sustainable Agriculture, requested the removal of regenerative economy, as I thought it was kind of a bit pessimistic language, I guess. And they suggested it be replaced with prosperous or flourishing. And they also had some talk around the low carbon, kind of removal of low carbon discussion, which we've sort of already touched a little bit on. Where you went with the regenerative economy, I think I'd sort of disagree with their views. I think it is sort of about aspirational, and it doesn't suggest that our economy is not flourishing at the moment, or isn't is sort of in a bad position. There's always room for improvement, but it's about sort of being able to self-sustain and be sort of kind of to restore, renew, revitalise itself. So we felt that there was appropriate language. There was a bit of things about, there was a bit of discussion, and we heard at the hearing as well about a few submitters changing the word to enable at least sufficient development capacity for housing to align with the NPSUD, National Policy Statement for Urban Development. I felt that wasn't really that necessary to kind of add that language in, while we're kind of the language used is still sort of doesn't contradict and still aligns with the NPSUD, and we've got plenty of things kind of requiring, kind of looking for better housing and better supply of housing, as well as affordability and things like that. So there was a number of different ones, like New Zealand Pork, had some directions, but overall there wasn't any recommendations that we heard that we felt that needed to be incorporated in. But happy to hear from the panel.
Megan.
So earlier I said words are really important, using consistent language, and that's where we talked about the infrastructure, but I completely agree with you. If we're just going to repeat the RMA language, this is not an RMA document. So I do agree that so long as it's giving effect to the high level, we don't need to add in all of those RMA. And I also agree with you when it comes to regenerative. I see that as a really positive word. If you just think about you want to generate and continue to generate and find ways to generate. So I just wanted to say I do agree that that's the right term for a regenerative economy.
Thanks, Megan. Elizabeth.
Just a wee bit of an aside, but just seeing the amount of responses that you've got fully, partly, and partly agree and fully disagree, etc., etc., is that it looked like there was some confusion when you guys were trying to ascertain where people were because you had either yes or no brackets for agreeing and not agreeing. And I think that's something that's really important for all of our surveys going forward, is that we actually don't just have just yes, no, we have yes, no, or partly disagree or something along those lines, because as you've accurately put here, there's times where you're not 100% sure whether they agree. Some aspects of that they don't agree, but you're not sure where they sit around going forward with the document. And I think, yeah, it would be good to just quantify those a little bit in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I touched that. We can kind of cover that a little bit more down towards the bottom of the document. But yeah, there was, and we heard a lot from the Ellesmere bus users, yeah, and Jade, I think her name was, her submission. I think everyone was really impressed with what she had to say. And yeah, she gave us some very valuable criticism of how we did this time around, which we fully agree with, and a lot of that we had already sort of noted, as we've noted in the partly agree, there should have been a wider ability to that. So yeah, there'll be a lot of work sort of on making sure that we constantly improving how we kind of consult and kind of receive feedback from the community. So yes, thank you.
Any further comments or changes that councillors would request? Otherwise, there's no changes recommended by staff, and we will support that decision. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. Thank you.
Yeah, so now we're down to the directions. Yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we've kind of that did speak to the directions was sort of covered in those sort of more topic-based things near the start. There was a bit of discussion around sort of creating a kind of hierarchy, or sort of making sure that some were at a higher level than others. Some people saying we need to make sure the environment was sort of first and foremost. Some had other views along those lines, but other than the kind of clear separation of that we've now kind of recommended to kind of clarify a bit more about having the outcomes and then supporting outcomes. We kind of made the conscious intent not to have a hierarchy, because these directions have got to be kind of fit for purpose in a wide range of situations and environments, and it's about sort of going back kind of to a higher order, like the vision and the direction, or and kind of say what's appropriate for this, and while things like so the only sort of thing that kind of says how important or how much we should put forward is sort of the language used. So where there's things a bit like in RMA situations where you've got words like protect, that has stronger emphasis perhaps than where you're saying kind of using other more softer language. So yeah, we didn't think it was appropriate to sort of add a hierarchy in. There was a number around that. There was Horticulture New Zealand did support the directions, but felt there should be a one that sort of pulled together everything for the rural environment. We felt that actually keeping that integrated, it's like there is. We don't want to create too much of a dichotomy, like a rural versus urban. There are some particular instances where there's like we do have one outcome about towns, but it's kind of managing, I guess, that balance between the rural and the urban. But overall, we wanted to make sure that like we're actually one voice, that there's not this is for the rural, this is for the townships. It's like most of the directions and outcomes are relevant in the rural environment. And I think if we tried to pull together all the rural environments, would have most of the directions and outcomes in that one. So it wasn't sort of we didn't think it would be appropriate to do that. There was a whole bunch of submission points that were received that we felt were encompassed, and there's a kind of table there that we won't go through every single one, but a lot of it was people calling for more that area level information or kind of direct area level type of things that we felt is encompassed higher on, and we can kind of work on that. So overall, there weren't any additional recommendations to make changes other than what we've talked about in the higher order or the topic based discussions.
Page 25, you've got the survey results of that 61% of the people disagree with the direction that we is being recommended. Just talk through that. How was any analysis that was done around that?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to a bit what Elizabeth touched on. Some of it we kind of tried to break it down. I mean, there was still, even when we did break it down, there was still about 44. There was a bunch of that partially disagreed, and there was some that disagreed. And we've got a bit of discussion around, often it was around sort of sometimes particular issues that they were focused on. But there, I think we kind of, it was sort of a lot of the disagree. It was hard to ascertain sort of what could be changed to improve it. And I think we, once again, going back to Elizabeth's point, more work needs to be on sort of being able to kind of tease out, like, if you don't agree, kind of what is it? Some of it was just a no, and that was all we got. So
I'd also preface that some of the disagrees because they didn't feel that the direction went far enough, or like Ryan's table there, someone disagreed because there wasn't a mention about, I'll just pick the top one, provide greater scope for the arts was a disagree, and then we've got under the recognised community supporting outcome a direction saying celebrate our local arts and traditions. So some of the disagrees were because they felt there was a particular aspect not captured in the directions. For example, there's one around community, I'll go with the second one, retain water races was an example of a disagreement, but we have really high level direction. So it's about protecting fresh water, recognising the interconnectedness of the blue network and the health and well-being of water other directions. So again, like Ryan mentioned, some of the disagrees because they couldn't see maybe project or very targeted examples at a level below, like community gardens or this particular bus route. And so it went to the area plan level, and we fully intend to engage with that feedback and do that work. But I think some of the disagreement with the directions were because they felt it didn't go either to the level enough in detail that they wanted, and or sometimes they didn't felt like it went far enough in terms of being firm enough direction, as well as disagreement with a particular direction rather than the suite of directions, because there's about 5 to 10 directions under each supporting outcome and then a few supporting outcomes. So again, like Ryan recognised that probably we could have improved our consultation questionnaire to actually drill down, and that's something we're going to take forward for the next time.
Good, Phil?
Yeah.
Okay. Sophie?
Yeah, thank you. And I guess that sort of speaks to it's actually really hard to design a good survey, because depending on what you're trying to get out of it, it's never going to be right. And you've always got to give space for more than just a yes, no. That doesn't necessarily mean you should have more boxes, but there's got to be space for people to say what they mean. The only thing I was really going to say was just support the lack of a hierarchy, because this is quite like a holistic aspirational vision document. not something that, again, you know, the way that the RMA works, and the RMA is probably in the process of being replaced again. So yeah, we're going to stick to what we need for our purposes, and that works perfectly. So, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. Definitely understand no hierarchy, achieve the vision and the spirit. We need progress on all of these. The other thing was the survey questionnaire was a binary yes, no, and then a space for reasoning, which ended up taking more staff and resource in to try and infer, or do they disagree with just one direction and or a suite of directions or a particular area. So we inferred that from the free text. So we did provide for that free text, and some of the themes that Ryan's already talked to. We're bringing those more specific feedback and points from the community on in each part of the question, but it was a yes, no binary with that and the reason or explanation for their decision, where we should have had yes, partially agree, partially disagree, and so, but we still had that opportunity for people to give those reasons, and then we've just had more man hours to understand what those disagreements were about, or partially agreeing or partially disagreeing. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Just on the recognised communities celebrate our local arts and traditions, I was wondering whether the traditions could be heritage, which would be a bit more diverse. That's in the submission points.
We do have a separate direction under recognised communities, protect and promote local heritage and notable trees. And we purposefully, notable trees is RMA language. It comes under the heritage banner, but we didn't use historic heritage, which is an RMA term. We kept it broad as heritage. So we did have a separate direction for that.
Okay, any further comments on this stuff? No further recommendations beyond what the panel is recommending, which is no changes. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
Right, so now we're getting down to the urban form direction. So that was sort of the movement and place sections. Let's get to the discussion. So there was a bit of discussion around Lynn Townsend identified that we in the township, the Lincoln Township thing, it talked about commercial, providing additional commercial activity, and suggested that business would be sort of a broader term to kind of encompass a wider, so include things like industry. And yeah, we agreed with that. There's not much discussion around that. We just thought that was better language to better encompass sort of what we're intending. So we recommended changing from commercial to business activity. Yeah, and this might go back to where to Elizabeth's point she wanted to raise. There was a bit of discussion around the language used for Lincoln and the net zero and the network township, and why we've chosen that language. So yeah, like I said, we're still in the early engagement. Like, we haven't kind of had in-depth discussions with townships about what their identity is, but we kind of started to set sort of a bit of direction that we identified. Part of it was about, so there's the sort of, I'll just pull up the I don't know if you'll be able to read it up there, but yeah, the description was education net zero town. There was kind of questioning around the net zero and why we've chosen that. So I mean, and going back to our discussion around reducing greenhouse gas emission, things like that, there is a direction that we've got the Paris Protocol to get down to zero net emissions by 2050. Kind of across the board anyway. So this isn't just something that's going to be unique to Lincoln. It's more about Lincoln, his best position to sort of lead the charge on that, both in terms of through the kind of the education facilities and research. So the like Ag Research and Lincoln University and the kind of the work they're doing, and also there's a strong voice for sustainability and emission reduction already within Lincoln. So we thought that so that's why that's the case. It's not saying that anywhere else is not going to be zero emission at some point. We've all got to get to that point, but it's about saying that Lincoln is best positioned to do that. In terms of the education as well, I think we can, from the information we got from Ag Research and submission, I think taking kind of, it's actually beyond just education, but it's about knowledge, and sort of, so that encompasses both the kind of the education of Lincoln University and the research done by the by Lincoln University and the SEOs, CROs, sorry. So there was a bit of changing a word around that, but yeah, we can open it up and I know start with Elizabeth with covering your.
So same thing, same again. I think we need to change that because it's too narrow, and I think this is a community that has a bigger picture.
Big picture in the zone.
Yeah, and I think knowledge is great because it is a knowledge town. So yeah, that's a really good factor.
Yeah, that's a point where we listened to submitters and they were like, well, it's not just the education, there's this great research and there's great innovation happening in Lincoln, and we have the knowledge zone in the district plan. So that was a nice alignment there to have knowledge and net zero. And yeah, take on board, we're going to go away and look at low carbon, decarbonise, net zero, which infers getting to net greenhouse gas emissions being zero. We could look at that as a broader thing. It might be good to have a steer because we've got broadly livable low carbon towns, which applies to all towns, and there's this opportunity for Lincoln to pioneer and go first, build the momentum on the great research that's happening and the EnviroTown and what's happening there. So we will, through the area plans, go to the community and hear what their aspirations are and look to reflect that back up into Waikirikiri Ki Tua Future Selwyn, where we get that more place-based engagement. But if you had something in the interim that you thought was more appropriate, that might give us a steer, because obviously all towns will be low carbon if we keep that language, or sustainable. We have sustainable, connected, and informed. So there is this opportunity for Lincoln to kind of seize the innovation and potential there.
Yeah, I think I quite like the way that you've just framed that, because everyone's going to be net zero. Like we have to move to that future, and this is really how do we highlight that Lincoln might be a place of emphasis and Selwyn first, because it is slightly different than everywhere else with the university and all the CRIs, and also the work that Lincoln EnviroTown Trust has done to champion these conversations within Lincoln Township itself as well. So I heard the submission that said don't label us, but to me this is about setting more of a direction of travel and a priority around. This would be something that for Lincoln we would be saying, how do we facilitate and support? And this gives some particular emphasis to the businesses there to say, we've heard that you're doing this, and we have continued to hear that they want to be in this space. So it kind of reflects what I would have expected Lincoln will be and has said that they would like to be. So I don't particularly want to see it change dramatically. If it can be broadened, as Elizabeth has said, there might be some other language that might be in it. But I've been interested from other councillors' perspectives. This seems in line with the types of conversations we've had around here. Does anyone have any other views around that in particular? Because it did come up when we're talking about it now. Sophie?
I'm just wondering whether that's something that we can get more steer from people when it comes down to the area plan stage, because that's where we're literally going to be talking to more people in Lincoln and just get a better gauge. Because historically, it is a town where you've got the EnviroTown Trust, you've got the university, and there's all of that work around that. But there's also been like an extra 5,000 people turn up in the last few years, and we don't actually know. And a lot of them drive into Christchurch every day, so that's actually going to be hindering stuff. But is this something that they don't actually want to continue doing? Do they want us to focus that, and then we can? Because it is helpful to have somewhere that will be an exemplar for that sort of work. If it's Lincoln, that kind of fits. But it feels like that, confirming that label might need to be done at the area stage. I don't know how we reflect that in this, like, we'd love it to be that, but do you want this? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, I guess a lot of this stuff will be either confirmed or might have to change based on the area plans. And we do want to, for the people of Lincoln to be able to kind of determine, we're just kind of at this level, I guess at the initial level, kind of set some indication, this is where we think we wanted to go. Tell us if we're wrong. It's easier to get, and I think part of what we've found is it's easier to, people are more willing to tell us what we've got wrong. It's like, if you want to learn something on the internet, you don't ask a question, you say something wrong, because everyone will come and tell you how to do it wrong, or correct you. So if we can kind of get, and we think this is, from what we've picked up, this is generally sort of the current thinking of where the people of Lincoln are wanting to go. There could be some work around sort of changing the kind of broadening the language a bit, but by kind of getting that kind of clear thing, when we go to the area plans, we can either get confirmation or and that can feed back up, and we can kind of make changes to future Selwyn to it, and at that stage.
Thank you, Megan.
Well,
No,
we're probably going to say the same thing, which is because we had this conversation about this. So what happens with all of the strategies that we're about to develop, and if they conflict, what happens? And what George made really clear is this is meant to be a living strategy that we're able to change all the time. And so from my perspective, it's great to have an aspiration there set for Lincoln. Lincoln has done things differently. Like even its stormwater network is different than most of the other towns in the district. So I think it's really important to have something aspirational, leaning towards what the community generally is about at the moment, and that's certainly my feel of Lincoln. And if it needs to change later, we can change it later. But it seems to be in fitting with what the environment is.
Yeah, I think you did say kind of what I was going to say. I was, saying that we developed the spirit of Selwyn and the vision with ELT and with council through some workshops, and we did have the Waikirikiri Ki Tua Future Selwyn engagement, which is very high level, like the framework, but that place-based direction and hearing from our communities, we're really excited to get into through the area plans, and we've always said that. There's the opportunity for that to punch back up and change. That's why the spirit is probably, I don't want to say vague or ambiguous, but it has that latitude for us to bring in that local voice back up into it, which is quite exciting. But our overarching framework would apply. It's just how do we roll this framework out in the different directions in different places and communities based on their priorities and their aspirations. I'd say with the net zero aspect, it is net emissions, not gross emissions, so that it's not a never emit again future for Lincoln. It's just to do things in this really innovative and creative way. And this net zero for Lincoln conversation came from the Who Migrated Christchurch conversation we had with Lincoln University and the Vice Chancellor before the MOU, talking about their ambitions with renewable energy in particular and what they're looking to do with their solar array, but also looking at biofuels and being really innovative there. And they had an aspiration for Lincoln being net zero, not just the university being self-sufficient, but that being about the town. And so we're kind of riding the coattails of that ambition and in the spirit of the MOU as well. So that would probably support that staying in there until we get to the communities and hear if that's something that they aspire to as well.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
How are we, George, going to take all your wonderful knowledge about what net zero means to you out to the community? Because when the community read net zero, that means to them, I'm never allowed to drive again if I live in Lincoln, and I can only buy local. So if I want mangoes, they're not going to have mangoes at the local New World. That's what that means to them. Because you're saying something completely different, but they're not going to get that before they get to submit on this next document. And this is the problem that we have.
I think we just should.
Really, education.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the whole community. I'm saying if we've got the wider community, then they need to be able to get more of the information.
There's a key term for the Black emission that's lifted from the first emissions reduction plan. I think we could do better with that language and make it clear to the users of Waikirikiri, Selwyn, what net zero could mean and give some more explanation around that. So I think there's a broad recommendation for us to do better in the key terms and explain things. So we'll take that net zero term that's already in the key terms and look to provide a more expansive definition, because we definitely want this to be accessible. I take Elizabeth's point quite strongly that this is for all the communities, not just technical people, so we need to do work around the language we use.
Yeah, and to capture that point, Elizabeth, around the community knowledge, that will be one of the key works of the Climate Change Committee, to think about not only what we're doing in Selwyn, but how we become leaders in this conversation for Selwyn. So panel recommendation is to support staff's recommendation, which is amend POHOP description and amend a second POHOP description. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. 5.7 district picture.
Yep, so we're nearing the end, I think. So the district picture, so that's a nice map towards the end. There was number of submissions around sort of what information we actually provided in there. There was a lot of thought that kind of was given to sort of what information is appropriate at this level, because we've got maps that have a lot of information and a lot of layers, and there gets a point where it's no longer usable for the common user, or possibly even for the technical user. So we wanted to make sure that we're kind of choosing the appropriate kind of high level information that was sort of at that district wide picture level, knowing that at the next level, at the area plan levels, we'll be able to put in sort of further information, and people will be able to kind of interrogate to a kind of finer detail or finer grain of information. So trying to kind of keep just at that high level information that is appropriate to be viewed at that higher level. Yeah, so like I said, a lot of that will be provided later in the area plans. There's kind of talk about land use capability. While it's turned off initially because it clutters up the thing if you're not looking at that directly, there is information around that, because there was some submissions around soil and the kind of the capability of the land, which also touches on the aspects of kind of the rural environment and kind of primary production and things like that. So there were some submitters that kind of said there wasn't enough information for the rural environment in the district picture, but we kind of felt like most of it actually was. The only stuff that's really township based is the township dots, and we've kind of kept that at a very abstract level. Yeah, and then there was the quarries identifying that we hadn't appropriately identified and protected sands and aggregates, and yeah, like I said, we've talked about, we agree, we'll probably talk about quite a lot. We agree that kind of protecting aggregates and the ability to kind of extract them as appropriate is important. But and there is sort of direction around that. We'll kind of improve the direction around that. At this higher level, it's a bit too much information, and we'll kind of be picking that up at the area plan, and also working with kind of consulting with the kind of the quarries about having discussions about them, about how we kind of can achieve that best and meet their needs, while also stopping that discussion we have of it's not a kind of clear cut area. There's positives and negatives of it. So overall, there wasn't any other recommended changes to the district picture that we saw.
Recommendation is not to have any further changes. Is there any conversation that councillors want to have on that? Changes they're expected to see? All those in favour of support of the recommendation say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried.
That's a So yeah, with the township network, there's not too much to cover there. We've kind of covered over it already. Like we've said, a lot of it's going to be kind of filled out and sort of reviewed through the area plans. We were able to kind of get more information on the township. There was mixed views on how the township should grow, whether certain townships should get bigger or wanted to stay the same. But a lot of that will will be kind of further outlined in the area plan stage, where we can kind of have those conversations directly with communities, and kind of consider it on a more, take a more considered approach to sort of what township should grow in what direction and things like that. A lot of the information received will be informing the area plans rather than making changes. So I haven't recommended any changes as a result of the submissions.
Any changes that councillors thought they were expecting to see, or anything they'd like to see added? Then that we support the recommended changes. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Carried.
Right, so that's most of it. So this is just sort of the mop-up stage. So there was a bit of other feedback received. Some of the feedback was sort of out of scope of what we're really doing. So we haven't really covered that. And unless there's particular things that people felt like we needed to cover, we won't sort of dig too deeply into that. And there's also a few things that around area plan and action plan we felt were a bit more appropriate to that. Things like kind of suggesting of rezonings and things like that of certain parcels of land, but that's for later on. So unless there's, I put a box there, but I don't know if there's, unless people have anything to suggest, there's no sort of as such recommended changes.
I don't think it's necessarily changes to the document, but I just wonder what we do with the information we've received. It might be out of scope for this process, but fits within council scope or any of our partners' scope. And so how do we pass on information within the organisation on the things that are received? And then also if it results in, if it's a submission that should have gone to ECAN on some other issue, how do we share that information with Environment Canterbury?
We can kind of do some work and kind of go through it and sort of separate them out and decide kind of where the appropriate kind of either team within council or other organisation that could use that information could go. And kind of within our team, we can kind of feed it through.
Just with those issues, do nothing.
Yeah.
Or the sense of relevant department, or converse with ECAN on the matter, or just whatever it is, so we know that it's not a black hole of information that we just asked for feedback on and did nothing with. Nicole?
That was actually what I was going to say, because like particularly we raised like a wheelchair swing outside the library and stuff like that, just asking how it was going to be captured, but you've pretty much answered it.
Yeah, I think there's two parts there. That the idea for the wheelchair swings over library, that's a carry forward to area plans. We've tagged those. These thing that we had the full intention of doing, but so nice to have that reminder to do it, is to decide what needs to be allocated elsewhere into the organisation and will be fed to our partners. Nitrates in drinking water and chlorine, that's our remit, but not at this process. So we'll make sure we pass that along.
And it's a really good thing to do, because from being someone who's been on the outside before I came on council, it can be quite hard that you end up having to go to say the same thing in a whole different forums. And if we can actually make it easier for everyone just to be doing it around our own partners and stuff, it's a lot more helpful. Yeah.
Thanks, Nicole.
We can also make sure we feed that back to the submitters, that our information we're feeding our information through to, so they've got a bit of a chain of where it's going.
Actually, that's awesome as well, to actually have that whole loop of feedback. Excellent, thank you.
Phil?
I think it's great that you've captured all this extra stuff, and I'm going to be a bit flippant for a moment. We've just set a new waffle down at the cafe down the road. Okay, I'm not sure that's on a strategy waffle.
That brings us to the final recommendation here, which is you're going to feedback the information which we'll just note But that is going to happen. All those in favour say aye. Anyone against? Declare it carried. And usability.
Yeah, so this is one that I think we've sort of touched on a bit, and Elizabeth maybe mentioned there was a bit of feedback around people struggling to navigate the Waikirikiri tour, future Selwyn, and the strategy within. And a lot of that's either, I guess, teething. This is a draft still, and we're still sort of working out. We've taken a kind of quite an innovative approach for this, being the online experience, and with that comes a bit of teething issues. Some of it is a lot of the information we've been already inputting and making sure that it's kind of clear navigation throughout the strategy. Some of it's kind of limitations of the software that we're using. There we can't, we might have grand plans for how we want it to work, but sometimes the programs that we used just to get it built that we had at our disposal were limiting. So there is work ongoing into making sure it's as seamless and smooth and fast as possible. We're looking at kind of maybe shifting it into a new, like using new programs or sort of building new programs for it, which won't kind of change the experience other than making it easier to use. So this is sort of not really covering the strategy itself. It's the kind of the usability. So we just wanted to kind of highlight that to you, that there'll be ongoing work. We'll also let you know that if there's anything that we think might actually, any changes that we're looking to do that might impact the actual strategy itself, that we'll always consider that and come back to council to kind of confirm any changes that we think might be kind of straying on that line. But we want to kind of be constantly improving it throughout. So just getting the kind of council's support on that. Is there anything you want to cover on that?
No, I think Ryan captured it perfectly, but it's a web experience, and some of the benefits of that we're seeing are other territorial authorities using the platform, which is the ArcGIS Experience Builder, great for spatial stuff and maps. That's not great for everyone, so there is a recommendation that there is a tangible physical copy of the key information of Waikirikiri Kitura Future Selwyn for non-digital users or those who might not engage with the platform. So we're trying to cover all our audiences, but recognize that there are some benefits to having it in this platform in terms of getting our information around population and our projections and housing, and we've got some of our maps. Making that really available, really publicly available, we think is really important as well. So we want to use the platform and then make some changes, improvements. Some of it's about performance, and it won't, like Ryan said, it's changing the form, not the content, and we will look to bring back an improved version of the platform when this comes back on the 23rd of October. So it's a recommendation that we're going to go away and do some work, and you'll see that on the 23rd of October. But it's just what we've heard from users in terms of their experience and challenges using the platform.
Thank you. Elizabeth.
It must be a hard job for you guys when you do this so long and you know what you're putting together to then try and analyse it for the lay people outside. And I was just wondering, do we have a little group of volunteers or a few elderly mixed age groups, people to run through your final copy and say user friendly, not user friendly, to give you the heads up before you go out to the public?
I don't think we've. I can take it.
Yeah, that's really great. So part of putting this out to the community, we've already had some really great feedback about the usability and some of the challenges and difficulties navigating it. We're going to take those on board now, and we want to get a user test group to look at some of the changes we've made and also some of the things that might not have been picked up through the engagement. A lot of people relied on the consultation document and therefore didn't get the full suite of information that's in the web platform. So some of those disagrees. You might have seen we've said, oh, it is in there. It was just not covered in the consultation document. So the full web experience houses a lot more information, and some of it could be easy to access. So before this comes back, we want to do that user testing. A diverse range of people in that user group test it. We're looking like it's a live thing. So we're looking to make progressive improvements beyond the 23rd of October date where it comes back. And again, it won't change the content. That would need a decision from council, just the form, making improvements. New things are coming out on a regular basis that can improve the speed, functionality, and make it a really seamless user experience. So we'll be looking to come back with an iteration on the 23rd of October and then make even better improvements just to how it runs. Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, I was just also add that we've kind of post the hearing, we've kind of touched base with the I think her name was Mary, who presented for the disability CCS. They already made contact and said we're kind of wanting to sort of work with them and alongside them to sort of inform both in the area plan, but we're hoping that they can kind of provide information on sort of, I guess, usability of the platform as well would be kind of good input that they could provide. So if we can kind of make sure it's accessible to those with sort of low visibility or learning impairment, or to make it, they're the kind of the experts, and we'll hopefully be able to use their reliable.
And Ron, we have one that reads itself to us.
Megan.
I just have a question about the consultation process. Did you find that most people just responded to the consultation document, or were you able to see through the submissions that they'd actually gone and used the interactive website? And if you could tell the difference, was there a difference in those submissions that actually had used the website as opposed to just the consultation document?
Yeah, I mean, there's some that you could kind of tell had probably not, or had kind of come in with their views already. There was some, I guess there was what people who highlighted that there were issues, because there were people who kind of said, I struggled to find what you're meaning here. Yeah. Then it was clear that they'd actually been interrogating, and and I mean, I agree that there's some parts that it's not kind of clear that it kind of connects through to, or that there's sort of something there. In terms of, I think sometimes people kind of, where they said you haven't got a direction around this and we've got a direction around that, it kind of suggested that they hadn't read every bit of it. But I don't know if that answers.
Yeah, I think it's really important that all the key information in order to engage and with make a submission and provide feedback needed to be in the consultation document, and we were confident that the consultation document had a lot of that key content in it. But where there was some, like I said, some of the benefits of having the web platform is that spatial data. So there was a really great submitter about Save Our Soils. I think she was a researcher at Research, or maybe Plant and Food. She was at CRI, forgive me for forgetting, said there's no mention of the word soil, and she'd be right for the consultation document. But then we said in the Our Opportunity section, there's a section called Land and Soil, and she'd looked at the district picture, which has the highly productive land definition rather than the land use capability classes 1, 2, and 3. And it was just a case of if they had gone to the depths of the whole web experience, where the consultation document tried to be accessible and put like the key information almost at a surface level, then some things were getting missed. So it was when submitters pointed out omissions, typically you've not got anything about Paitapu, or you've not mentioned the word soil once, is mainly relied on the consultation document rather than the full of experience of Waikirikiri, Kituafu, so on. So it was around some of the omissions and submissions that you've omitted things, and they were a lot of disagrees, relied on the consultation document rather than the web experience.
That is really helpful, because I found the web, I read every single part of the website, and I could see that definitely mana whenua is a big feature of the website, less so in the consultation document, but well covered in the consultation document. But a really big feature is the historical context on the website. Yeah.
Thanks, Megan. Sophie.
Hi, just an extra wee bit of feedback on the web part, because we've spoken several times today about the key terms and the glossary and everything, and just thinking about it, because I've been trying to look at it all as we've through the morning, and actually if you go backwards and forwards, unless you have a couple of different windows open, but if you're on a mobile device you can't really do that. If you've got a small screen it becomes illegible. There are ways that you can put like a little bubble if there's something that's referred to in a key term. So if somebody wants to know what it is, you hover over the word and it'll tell you what your definition is. I just don't know how much extra bandwidth that takes, but that might be worth considering for the next iteration.
You're speaking my language. That was one of my first requests from this software, which is why we're looking at replatforming. So in the E-plan, ISO software for the district plan, within in situ, you don't need to go to a glossary key term section. You hover over, you get a pop-up bubble and explains the term so you can read it in its context. That was one of the key things that came from user groups, key things that we identified, and is a limitation of the platform, which is why we're looking, if we can't resolve that, we might have to re-platform. So these are some of the key things that have come out, and that is, I think sometimes when people have said, oh, net zero is not clear, and there is a key term for net zero, thinking of the submission from Fiona Aston, from Aston Consulting in particular around that, and it's because from no fault of their own, you have to go to one section and come back, and in a mobile device, not that helpful. We have been working since the draft went out on a mobile-friendly version and a tablet-friendly version, so it should be loading a lot better in those devices, and we actually find from our users that people will engage with this a lot more on phones. Like maybe we'll get home and turn their laptop on from a day of work. I certainly don't. I see enough of that screen as it is. So people are engaging on those handheld devices. So we're trying to build it for that. And then the laptop device comes second to that now, recognizing that that's how people live their lives now. So we've had some great learnings from that. So that will be our focus going forward for any web experience. But I appreciate that option. I'm trying to get it through. Otherwise, we'll have to have something else house this, because I think it's really key.
The other part I was going to mention was support for some sort of printed availability of it, but in the formatting, thinking about it, how the consultation is and just how the different levels of detail in here are, if we're hoping that people are going to be using this as part of when they're developing a subdivision plan or something like that, like we do with the district plan, it's quite easy to reference which sections you're addressing through something like a district plan. This one at the moment doesn't really have those 5.3 dash whatever. Yeah. It's not quite so simple at the moment.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. I thought I had maybe I didn't make. I must have missed it. There was an thing of putting in sort of like numbering around the objectives and outcomes and directions.
Yeah, there's a recommendation for numbering and short code, so then they're so clear around everything.
Yeah, we do want it to be used.
Yes, I think being able to know where you are within the system is something that's hard to do and something we definitely want to improve. So hopefully we've made progress by the time that the council meeting comes around, but it'll be ongoing.
Great. Does it bring us to the end of the decisions that we need? If you'd just like to highlight what the next phases are for this work stream.
Short term will be going back to our caves and so short term we're going back to our cave and we'll be trying to implement all the recommendations you've put in. I think it should be that we can kind of get those. I don't think there was anything that was sort of too complicated or would sort of other than the sort of the constant improvements to the usability. So we should have all those improvements sort of integrated, I think, by the time of the council meeting next month, and we'll kind of highlight all the changes that we've made, the rewordings, things like that, for you to adopt. Taking that will go ahead, hopefully, then we're going to be going straight into kind of getting the area plan underway. George, do you want to kind of speak to that?
So we are coming to a briefing on the 25th with a broad overarching view of proposed approach for engagement on the area plans, recognising that this is just setting the parameters of our intentions around that engagement approach and the different phases, and not getting into any of the content or details of these area plans until that decision's been made on Waikirikiri to a future Selwyn. So it just outlines the board phase, what we're intending to do, and it'll come back for council decisions on key phases of the area plan engagement. So that'll be coming on the 25th of September. So that will be before future Selwyn comes back to you. The reports on the in October will outline some of the work that we need to go away and do, and obviously some of the recommendations panel have accepted without change, so that but those ones will highlight where we've done some further work and make that really clear in the report, have an appendix of all the key changes, as well as a URL for the updated web experience. So you can see some of those usability changes, which are really hard to convey through words. So there'll be a link for council to get familiar with the web experience and changes there too.
Great. So this brings to an end the substantive decision-making work that we'll be contributing to the council, with the next council meeting being the sign-off of everything in the process and where we've got to so far. So really want to say thank you to the staff that we've had involved in all of this. It's been a massive piece of work, and I think the way that you've gone through today and shown us your deep knowledge of the work that you've done previously, and also your responses to to the submissions, shows that we've got staff that are really engaged in this process and aren't just jumping from one thing to the next, but aren't also stuck so much in our ways that we aren't able to respond where the community comes in and talks to us. So thank you for the way you've done that and taken us through today. Steve, you didn't have anything else to add? That brings us to the end of this meeting, and we'll close with karakia. Unahia, Tapo, kia wātia, ai, kia wātia. Thank you, everyone.